So I asked a few more questions, and the result was even more surprising. It seems like all the demons nearby know about this except for us. From this, it could be seen how widespread the news was. If the Lord Dongting was really killed in the Ruasi, then where is the Ruasi? It's said that it's in the easternmost region, and no one has ever been there before. Isn't the Ruasi tens of thousands of miles away from here? Doesn't that mean that all the demons in the world know about this matter? As he spoke, he looked at Li Yunxin's expression. At this moment, Li Yunxin was sitting in front of the copper stove, one arm on the table, the other on his leg. He squinted his eyes listening to him. The light from the fire cast a shadow on his face, making his eyes look especially dark. His pupils were huge like two small black holes. When Lao Dao said this, Li Yunxin blinked a few times and calmly asked, "Ah, what's going on?" Lao Dao stood up, walked in front of Li Yunxin, and stayed silent for a while. Then, he slowly said with a very gentle voice, "Think about it. This kind of big matter, but even a little demon knows about it. Is it reasonable?" Li Yunxin thought for a while, and said in a low voice, "It's not reasonable." The old Taoist then said, "Then think about it again. When something is too bizarre, does it mean that this matter is indeed very strange, or, when we were thinking about this matter, we might have taken a wrong turn and thought in the wrong direction?" Li Yunxin was silent for a while, blinked a few times in confusion, as if he was thinking about a difficult problem. Lao Dao didn't rush him, only stood in front of him, quietly watching him think. After a few seconds, Li Yunxin said, "Yes, took a wrong turn, thought in the wrong direction." Hearing this, Lao Dao's expression suddenly relaxed. As if the previously tense breath was released, even his forehead was sweating. He didn't know whether it was because of extreme nervousness or because of exhaustion. From the time he told Li Yunxin about the Lord Dongting matter until now, a total of 3/4 of an hour had passed. However, these 3/4 of an hour were rarely long in his life. He forced himself to gather the last bit of spirit, took a deep breath and finally said, "Yes. So now you need to have a good rest. Go take a rest, take a look outside the window. Look outside the window. The moonlight is like water, the night is also clear. Listen to the sound of the waves. You will slowly feel that this kind of night is quiet and warm. Now that you have thought it through, there is no more worry in your heart. Why don't you take a good rest and sleep?" Lao Dao bent down and looked into Li Yunxin's eyes. One hand slowly reached over to support his back, and the other hand gently placed on his forehead. "Sleep for a while. I'll sleep until the sun rises." His hand moved down and closed Li Yunxin's eyes. Li Yunxin was like a puppet whose strings were pulled. His body suddenly went limp and fell into his arms. So he began to dream. The dream was clear and realistic, but the light in the dream was a little cold and a little dark, like the early morning when the sky was not completely bright. He stood in front of a door in a corridor. The floor of the corridor was covered with a scarlet carpet. The carpet was so thick that one could not hear any sound when he lightly stamped his feet. There were cameras on the wall. Within 10 steps, there were 2 small cameras aimed at the door. No one could escape the eyes of the watchers. This door was a wooden door wrapped in genuine leather. It was not as strong as those cheap, roughly welded iron bars, and seemed to be a prop used by the owner of this door to show off his wealth and taste. Li Yunxin pushed the door open. Behind the door was a study. From the decoration to the layout, it showed that the owner of the study had amazing wealth, but was not completely used to it. The owner sat behind the wide table, frowning and playing with something in his hand. The thing was dark and slightly shiny. Li Yunxin stared at it for a while, and it took him some time to realize that it was called a gun. His mind was still very slow, and his senses were numb. He saw the man behind the table turn his head and say something to him, but the voice seemed to come from the horizon, faintly discernible. He heard every word that the man said, but he did not know what the content was. Then suddenly, his consciousness suddenly became sharp, as if his soul had returned to his body. So he remembered what he should do in an instant. He was a doctor. That man was his patient. However, he did not appear here today to listen to his complaints, nor to comfort his desperate and ruthless heart, like he did in the past 2 years. To kill him. after making him suffer for half a year. This was his goal. Li Yunxin was stunned for a second. Then, when the man raised his voice impatiently, he strode in front of him. He raised a hand, snapped his fingers and said only 3 words, "Follow me." Thus, the man who was waving the gun in his hand and shouting impatiently at Li Yunxin quietened down in an instant. Then he nodded and put down the gun. Like a friendly ordinary person, he walked to Li Yunxin and smiled, revealing 6 teeth. "Dr. Li, let's go." Then, the scene jumped into a room. The room had no windows, was dark and cold, and was only illuminated by an incandescent lamp on the ceiling. The man was chained to the wall, like a chained dog. He only had 1 foot left. His other foot was gone, and half of his calf was gone. The wound was carefully bandaged, and there was no trace of blood. This seemed to mean that the wound had healed. Then the man heard the door open. He immediately widened his eyes and gritted his teeth. He seemed to be so afraid that he could not even retreat. Or perhaps he knew that it would be useless to retreat. He could not escape at all. Li Yunxin pushed the door open and walked in. In his left hand he carried a yellowed medicine box. In his right hand he carried an axe. The blade of the axe gleamed coldly. He stared at the man for a while and said with a smile, "I've finished eating." When the first ray of sunlight shone into the room, Li Yunxin suddenly sat up on the bed. He was stunned for a moment, and then he saw outside the window. It was no longer dark but a blue sky. Right now, he was sitting on the bed in the big room, covered with a thin quilt. The sunlight was a little dazzling, and his back was slightly damp, as if he was sweating from sleep. He heard the faint sound of cicadas. He heard the sound of water birds. He widened his eyes and turned to look at the man sitting by the bed. Lu Laodao was also looking at him. His eyes were bloodshot, and his lips were dry and chapped. His mouth trembled slightly for a while, and then he said as if he had made up his mind, "I hypnotized you. Last night I hypnotized you. I made you sleep well. I used the method that you taught me." Li Yunxin still stared at him, as if he did not know what to say or do. The old Taoist priest took another deep breath. "To calm you down. You were hypnotized by me. Do you realize how out of control you were last night?" After he said that, after a long while, Li Yunxin slowly turned around, stepped on the ground, and sat facing the old Taoist. Then, he stared at Lu Laodao for a quarter of an hour before he suddenly sighed and looked down at his feet. "You're right. I lost my mind," he said in a low voice. "I lost my mind. So I should start working." Chapter 335. After saying that, Li Yunxin stood up. He walked a few steps and shook his robe as if to encourage himself. Then he stood by the window and stared at the lake in the distance. After a moment of silence he said, "I have to find that person. You are right, I lost my mind. In this world, even the so-called God, Black Bai Yanjun, is just a stronger creature. What is there to be afraid of about the person who schemed against me? Last night, I was probably scared." Lao Dao was stunned by the bedside. He did not expect that. Li Yunxin still persisted in that thought. He still thought that someone schemed against him. So he sighed in his heart and tried to speak again. "Brother Exon, there are some words." However, he suddenly felt a slight swelling in his ears before he could finish his words. It was a familiar feeling. It was as if someone had put his palms flat and pressed them against his ears. But the strange feeling did not stop there. He felt a slight itch on his body. It was as if the hairs on his body were attracted by something and all stood up. Therefore, the friction between the hairs on his body and the clothes on his body was both itchy and tingling. Lao Dao stopped talking because of this strange feeling. He thought, Li Yunxin was angry. He hypnotized him first, and now he doubted his deduction again. Li Yunxin was such a proud person, and he did not have a good temper. He probably couldn't bear it anymore. But then, he found that Li Yunxin's hair was floating. His black hair was originally hanging down his back, contrasting with his snow-white robe. But now, when Lu Laodao saw Li Yunxin turn around, there was doubt in his eyes. A few strands of hair in front of his forehead were fluttering. Lu Laodao was actually familiar with this scene. In winter, the weather was dry and everything was dry. When he took off his clothes at night, his clothes would make a crackling sound, and his hair would stick together. If he was not careful, his hair would be stung. Lao Dao was puzzled. In fact, it had only been a breath's time since he felt strange. Then he saw Li Yunxin's expression change. His brows were slightly furrowed, and his eyes narrowed as he looked at himself. However, in the next moment, his eyes suddenly widened, and his eyeballs rolled upwards as if he wanted to look at the sky. In Lu Laodao's eyes, Li Yunxin's next movement became very slow. He did not know if it was because his body instinctively sensed extreme danger, and thus reacted before his consciousness. He saw Li Yunxin open his mouth, raise his hand, and his robe bulged with a boom. They also saw that Li Yunxin's fingertips were emitting golden spots of light in the void, which was the mysterious light when he was writing talismans out of thin air. They could also see Li Yunxin's appearance changing as he wrote. Steel-like scales grew out from his cheeks, and his body also expanded. 2 red lights were about to shoot out from his forehead. The air became thicker and more viscous. His eardrums felt like they were about to burst. All of a sudden, everything became extremely quiet. Then, with a loud rumble, a bolt of lightning that was almost as thick as the entire house suddenly struck down. The Emperor Star Palace of the Lord Dongting was not an ordinary thing. Ordinary fire could not destroy it, and ordinary knives and axes could not leave a mark on it. Moreover, the palace was protected by several restrictive spells, making it even more impregnable. However, this big house in the middle of such a divine palace was instantly smashed by this huge bolt of lightning. The tiles, stones, and hardwood that had been enchanted were all turned into the tiniest powder in an instant. In the sky above the Emperor Star Palace, a vast expanse of golden light erupted. That was the ominous light that was released because the restriction outside the palace was shattered by the incomparably violent power. However, there was more than one bolt of lightning. At this moment, 1,000 meters above the Emperor Star Palace on the mountain of the Lord Dongting, a thick whirlpool-like cloud was rapidly expanding. Soon, the sun and the blue sky could not be seen. From within this thick cloud, more than 100 lightning snakes struck down like a storm. The air around the entire Mount June became white because of this terrible power. Then clouds of fire spread out with a roar. Everything happened in the time of 2 breaths. 2 breaths ago, the sun was shining on Mount June and the breeze was blowing. 2 breaths later, the verdant plants on the island were all gone. The entire island changed from dark green to crimson red. Large tracts of bright red lava poured down from the top of the mountain like a waterfall and rushed into the lake. Because of this, the water in the lake evaporated and soared into the sky. The water was then penetrated by the dense curtain of lightning and turned into even more violent shock waves, setting off wave after wave of earth-shattering waves on the surface of the lake. However, in the midst of such a terrifying momentum, violent power, and thorough bombardment, the peak of Mount June that was already filled with boiling magma still had a grain of golden light that was the size of a grain of rice. It was blindingly bright. As the saying goes, a grain of rice also dares to compete with the sun and the moon. People often used this saying to laugh at fools who overestimated their own capabilities. But right now, this overwhelming curtain of lightning that was bombarding down was more than just the brilliance of the sun and the moon. They were so dazzling that this light could be seen from 100 or even 1,000 miles away. It made the morning sun hanging high in the sky appear dim. But that dot of golden light on the peak of the huge Mount June Island, actually burst out with a dazzling light that was not inferior to the others. The ground within a few feet around it was completely intact, like a lonely stone pillar that had popped out from the boiling sea of lava. At the top of this pillar, Li Yunxin, who had already revealed his fiend god body, was surrounded by clouds and mist. His hands held up to the sky. The densely packed golden runes around him flickered in and out of existence, rotating at high speed, forming a dazzling golden barrier around him. And in front of him floated 2 scrolls. It was the second of the Octatic Treasure's ancient scroll. These 2 treasures, which were even more powerful than spirit maps, were also emitting brilliant golden light by Li Yunxin. They resisted the terrifying power that came crashing down from the sky. Old Taoist Lu, on the other hand, stood beside him completely stunned. In the time of 2 breaths, In the time of 2 breaths, he witnessed the verdant Mount June Island instantly turn into a purgatory on earth with lava flowing everywhere. His 7 apertures were shaken to the point of bleeding, even though he was under the protection of Li Yunxin, as an emptiness realm cultivator. His bones were still creaking. It was so painful that it seemed like they would all break in the next moment. He was at a loss, as if he didn't know what to do at all, because he saw that even Li Yunxin, who had revealed his fiend god body, had golden blood seeping out of his steel-like scales. The blood converged into a small stream between the scales and gurgled to the ground. As soon as it touched the ground, it burned and emitted green smoke. Li Yunxin was already like this. What else could he do to help? The strong light made him almost unable to open his eyes, and the huge roar almost deafened him. Even in such an environment, he could barely hear Li Yunxin talking to him. I was right. Li Yunxin's tone was unexpectedly calm, as if the heavenly thunder was just a gentle breeze and drizzle to him. He continued to use his supernatural power to transmit his voice into Lao Dao's ears. Yesterday I said that someone broke my supreme indifference, and today someone made such a big scene. I was right. Hee. But no matter who it is, at least I have a knot in my heart. I don't need to bother to guess whether I'm delusional or not. He grinned and looked up at the sky, but he could see nothing except the dazzling white light. Or rather, he could only see the layers of prohibition that he had activated, which were getting dimmer and dimmer under the continuous strikes of the heavenly thunder. Hearing his words, Lao Dao was even more anxious and hateful in his heart. He wished he could bang his head against the wall and die at once. He didn't care whether Li Yunxin could hear him or not. He beat his chest and stamped his feet, shouting, "It was I who harmed you. If I believed your words last night, and you were still awake, you wouldn't be trapped here. Wouldn't you not know when they came?" But Li Yunxin smiled grimly. If this is also part of that person's plan, everything is interlinked. You didn't ask me to sleep last night, so there must be something else. In his plan, what's the big deal about such a small mistake? They will come sooner or later. I'm glad I came from Mount June. Now listen carefully. I can't hold on any longer. Lao Dao wanted to say something again, but Li Yunxin's tone became a little anxious. So I have to go. But once I leave, you should know that it's not the time for me to go to Dongting, Pitfall Mountain, or Rong City anymore. I don't know if we can meet again in this life after I leave. Hearing his words, Lao Dao was anxious and sad. The pain in his body was unbearable, and he choked for a moment. What are you talking about? But Li Yunxin didn't even want to say a word of nonsense. You have to understand. Since I came to the city of Wei until yesterday, although I was in danger from time to time, I always turned misfortune into fortune. Now I think, it's because others didn't know me well enough and didn't deal with me seriously, so I could pretend to be weak to eat the strong. Now after so many things have happened, they probably think that they have already figured out my methods and trump cards. So they first broke my oblivion, and then they really started to make a move. The previous days were dull and boring. That was the calm before the storm. And I have thought about this day for a long time, so I tried to prepare for it, but it was too late. Yesterday I knew about the art saint, so I knew this day was approaching. Now after I leave, I need you to do a few things. I don't know if I'll be lucky or not. If you do these things well, maybe I still have a chance to survive. At this moment, listening to Li Yunxin's farewell words, which were completely different from his usual confident tone, Lao Dao had already realized that things were not good. Therefore, tears ran down his face. How could he say anything? He could only nod repeatedly. Then he heard Li Yunxin say, "After I leave, if you can survive, you can tell the person that you turned against me long ago. Maybe you can survive. You can hypnotize me last night, I believe you. Then if you can still be free, go to Rong City. Someone will come to ask you to assist Prince Rong. If you can do it, I want you to do everything you can to make things big. It's best if that Prince Rong succeeds." When he said this, the golden blood on his body flowed more rapidly. The armor plates on his arms shattered piece by piece, producing a continuous sound like popping beans. And the momentum of the divine thunder in the sky gradually weakened. This seemed to be a reasonable thing to do, such a violent and fierce force. a force that 2 octatic treasures ancient scrolls could not withstand. If it could continue to strike for a while, who in the world would be a match for it? Li Yunxin was already an arrow at the end of its flight, and the divine thunder was also an arrow at the end of its flight. Therefore, he struggled to hold on until the lightning in the sky gradually disappeared, leaving only a particularly thick purple lightning bolt that struck down. Only then did he shout loudly, "Live!" The lightning bolt hit his body. With a boom, Li Yunxin disappeared in a flash of golden light. A tearing bamboo fracture fan with green smoke was hit in the air and fell to the ground with a clatter. And Lu Laodao also fell to the ground because of this last earth-shaking bang. Up in the sky, the whirlpool of dark clouds gradually dispersed, revealing a dense crowd of cultivators, nearly 100 of them. These practitioners did not seem to come from the same school, but were divided into 3 groups. Although the color and details of their clothes were slightly different, the style was very similar. This style was also similar to the Taoist priests of the Shangqing Danding sect and the Lingshu sword sect, who were stationed in the city of Wei. This meant that these 3 groups of people came from the 72 schools of Daotong and Kenzo. Right now, these 3 groups of people seemed to be stunned, staring at the Mount June Island that had turned into a sea of fire, and the fog and huge waves that spread for nearly 100 miles around the island. They did not speak for a long time. They were not looking at the surviving Lu Laodao. But, isn't Li Yunxin in the true realm? The speaker stood in front of a group of disciples of the Shangqing Danding sect, stepping on a dipper, which was made by cutting a gourd in half and drying it in the sun. However, this dipper was neither made of metal nor wood, and it was extremely huge. Behind him, there were more than 20 disciples standing on the flying magic treasure. At this moment, when the sect master of the High Clarity Pill Cauldron sect moved, the magic treasure beneath his feet moved as well. Therefore, the group of disciples staggered left and right. There were even some who cried out, as though they were afraid of falling. This meant that many of them had not reached the transcendent realm and could not fly in the sky. Didn't you say that your 9 heavens godly thunder could kill cultivators below the profound realm? Didn't you use your full strength just now? The speaker stood in front of a group of disciples of the Lingshu sword sect. There were also dozens of disciples behind him. There were a dozen or so people riding on flying swords, barely managing to stabilize themselves in the high winds. The remaining 20 stood on a big treasure sword. This big treasure sword was obviously this master's flying Dharma treasure. It was surrounded by a green light, and 2 ancient runes were carved on it. One was Shun, and the other was Scholar. The group in the middle was the group that the 2 sect leaders were questioning in disbelief. The leader of this group had a gloomy expression, and he frowned. He was holding a small dark cloud in his hand. If this dark cloud was enlarged, it would look like the huge cloud that had just bombarded Mount June with countless terrifying lightning bolts. Chapter 336. This magic treasure is known as the 9 heavens godly thunder. How can it be fake? The head of the 9 heavens godly thunder sect was silent for a while, then suddenly said, "Now that the result is like this," he paused again. "I want to ask you, who is this Li Yunxin, that he can actually resist my 9 heavens godly thunder for 6 whole breaths of time?" The head of the Pill Cauldron sect, a perfected master cultivator, Gui Yuanzi sneered. "You're asking us now? When the 2 sages announced the decree, didn't you say that Li Yunxin is just a true realm demon? What is there to be afraid of? You also said in front of all the cultivators that the people of Langia Cave couldn't do anything to him because they underestimated him. You also said that with the power of our 3 sects working together to activate your magic treasure, the 9 heavens godly thunder, we would definitely be able to kill him in one blow. Do you remember all of that now?" Thus the head of the 9 heavens godly thunder sect, a perfected master cultivator, Chung Kongzi, frowned again. "Why did you mention those words? The current Daotong Kenzo is in a state of disunity, and the 2 sages don't care much about it. The reason I said that was because I thought that it was rare for such an arrogant demon to appear. Finally, we fellow cultivators can work together. I also saw that they weren't very enthusiastic about this matter, so I said those words to fit the situation. Why are you so angry now? They only talked for a few breaths of time. In fact, they were talking as they descended to the ground. In addition to the head of the Pill Cauldron sect, and the head of the Nine Heavens Godly Thunder sect, the head of the Ling Su Sword sect, Mingjinzi, was also in the true realm. However, these three high cultivators could travel 1,000 miles in a breath, but the disciples standing on their magic treasures couldn't. Thus, they could only slowly descend. At least they didn't cause non-combat casualties. Seeing that on the half-melted June mountain, the figure of Lu Laodao, who was lying on the only intact piece of land, could be clearly seen, Ming Jinzi of the Ling Xiao Sword sect sighed. Forget it. You two don't argue. Li Yunxin was a fiendish demon. He must have used the palace to escape. We also know that the back door of his summer palace is around Dongting. Now we send out the useful disciples, and we will stay in Mount June. No matter how powerful he is, he will be seriously injured if his body is able to withstand the divine lightning of the ninth heaven. Once we discover his whereabouts, the three of us can kill him together. Do you think he can escape? It's best if you can't escape. The head of the Shangqing Danding sect snorts coldly. Our three sects are the closest to Dongting, so we have the upper hand. If we let him run far away while wounded, right now all the schools and sects in the world want to kill him. If someone else takes the prize, we won't be able to get the magical treasures from the two saints. With that said, the three true state sect masters each ordered their disciples who had reached the transcendent state and could fly in the air to search for Li Yunxin's whereabouts. As for the three of them, they left the magic treasures and their disciples in the air and landed on the stone pillars in the lava sea of Mount June. As far as they know, the person on the stone pillar is the most valued evil cultivator of Li Yunxin. Now that Li Yunxin left him and escaped, it can be seen that he is really seriously injured. This person must know many secrets of Li Yunxin. The three heads don't want their disciples to know those secrets. When it lands on the ground, it immediately feels amazing heat. Now this stone pillar is several meters high out of the lava, but the ground still begins to be scorched black. Some scattered objects on it, such as wood chips, dead branches, and pieces of cloth, all begin to emit smoke slowly, as if they will burn in the next moment. There are also some other things. Ming Jinzi glances at the ground and immediately sees the broken bamboo fracture fan. The bamboo ribs of the fan are also smoking and slowly become scorched black. However, the painting on the surface of the fan is undamaged. It is obvious that it is a treasure. Thereupon, the head of the Ling Su Sword sect stretched out his finger, and the fan flew into his hand. He frowns slightly and caresses the surface of the fan for a while. Then he raises his head and looks at the other two. This extraordinary object must be Li Yunxin's temporary imperial residence. He really did use the temporary imperial residence to escape. Then with a flip of his hand, he puts the fan into his sleeve. The other two are knowledgeable. How can they not know that the fan is also a treasure? Just as they are about to speak, they hear Lu Laodao groan softly on the ground, as if he is about to wake up. If an ordinary person were to lie on the ground for a while, their skin and flesh would have been scorched. However, Lu Laodao is an emptiness realm Taoist priest, and his body is much stronger than that of an ordinary person. Therefore, although he was seriously injured and on the verge of death, he still regains some consciousness. He groans again and slowly opens his eyes. The dark clouds that covered the sky and the sun have dispersed. The dazzling white light and the loud rumbling sound have also disappeared. Lao Dao's blurry vision first sees the dazzling sky and the three figures above. Three cultivators wearing tall hats and wide belts are standing next to him, looking down at him from above. When his vision becomes a little clearer, he sees the expressions of the three people. They are expressionless. They look at him as if they are looking at an ant. Then he sees one of the cultivators move his lips, as if he is saying something, but his eardrums were shattered by the last loud sound, and he is now deaf. Thereupon, Lu Laodao clenches his teeth and props himself up to sit up, panting for a while. This action seems to surprise the three cultivators. Such a small evil cultivator, who is already at the end of the road. Under the pressure of the three of them, he is actually able to sit and breathe, as if there is no one else around him. Does he not know that he is already at death's door? But this is not the most surprising thing. After this, Lao Dao breathes heavily and coughs out a few mouthfuls of black blood. He slowly regains some strength and unexpectedly opens his mouth. His voice is hoarse, as if his throat is blocked by filthy blood or pieces of internal organs, and he can only squeeze out a hissing sound like a leaking bag. Save me. The three sect leaders look at each other, thinking that this person has reached the end of the road and has gone crazy. But then they see that Lao Dao then rolls his eyes. Sooner or later, save me and ask, why waste time? The sect leader of the High Heaven Sword sect, Ming Zhenzi, is silent for a while, then suddenly smiles and points at Lao Dao on the ground, saying to the other two sect leaders, "This person is interesting." But the other two obviously do not have the same leisure mood as him. They both frown. The sect leader of the Pill Cauldron sect, Gui Yuanzi, coldly snorts. In order to survive, he is just staking it all on one throw. This kind of courage, even animals have it. But although he said that, he still reaches into his sleeve and takes out a golden yellow bud pill. This thing is a treasure for low-level cultivators. Consuming it can prolong one's life, strengthen one's body, and raise one's cultivation. But for this Taoist master, who is proficient in the Tao of pills, this kind of little thing seems to be something that can be casually used. And so, he casually sprinkles it. He exerts force with his fingers, crushing the pill. Then he flips his palm, and with a bang, the scattered powder is hit through the air into Lao Dao's body. This force makes him spit out a large mouthful of black blood. But his whole person seems to be much more spirited. After another 2 breaths of time, Lao Dao blinks, looking at himself with a slightly surprised expression. Then he pretends to stand up. It seems that he has already recovered. But just as he stands up, the sect leader of the 9 Heavens Divine Thunder sect, Chung Kongzi, shouts like thunder, "Heretic, kneel and talk. Words are law." This shout naturally contains the unique technique of the Divine Thunder sect. The rolling sound waves hit Lao Dao's body, causing him to kneel again with a thud, knocking the ground to crack. But what surprised them was that Lao Dao's expression still doesn't change. After being shouted at to kneel, he calmly kneels. How can an ordinary cultivator endure such extraordinary shame and humiliation? But the 3 sect leaders don't know the sufferings of the human world. This Lu Gongzan, Lao Dao, in his early years, first became a bandit, then made a living in the marketplace. The fickleness of human nature. What kind of humiliation hasn't he endured? Right now, this so-called humiliation is really just like a cool breeze to him. He kneels, so he kneels. He even laughed. This master has misunderstood. There are many heretic demons in the world. But I, Lu Gongzan, am not some heretic demon. Hearing him speak, Ming Zhenzi felt that this person is more and more surprising, and for a moment, a bit of interest was born. His personality was more easygoing than the other 2 sect leaders. So he said, You have some guts, evil Taoist. Aren't you Li Yunqin's most valued lackey? What are you trying to say now? Lao Dao wiped his face. Then she looked up at him. Li Yunqin, that is the true evil and heretical path. Ming Zhenzi was slightly stunned, then laughed. Oh, this kind of trick. It's not a trick. Lao Dao straightened his back and said solemnly that Li Yunqin had just used his dragon palace to escape and told me to feign civility with the 3 Sendo in exchange for a way out. And he told me that if I could live, I should help him do something so that he could live too. Pooh. He spat on the ground. It's been 4 months, and now I finally escaped from his clutches. The 3 exchanged glances, but none of them believed him. Ming Zhenzi laughed again and said teasingly, "Oh, so you're the one feigning civility with him? But wasn't he the one who gave you all of your Tao techniques and cultivation? I heard that the fiendish demon Li Yunqin treated you quite well." Lu Gongzan laughed without any fear on his face. This cultivation base of the Tao? I'll let the 3 Sendo know that I, Lu Gongzan, used to learn some unorthodox methods. In the eyes of the Sendo, they are shallow and unorthodox methods. But even so, I have no treasured land, no medicinal pills, no teacher. And I have to run around the streets to make a living. But I still reached the state of conception. How is my aptitude? That Li Yunqin seized my Dragon King temple and gave me some water cloud force. I've only reached the emptiness realm, but when did he ever give me any pointers? He's a heartless man. He thought he gave me a lot of benefits, but he never thought about how I did it. At this point, Lu Gongzan turned his head and glanced at the magma sea below the stone pillar. He suddenly fell silent for a moment. He suddenly turned his head and pointed downwards. Do the three Sendo know what's there? My cultivation companion is there. The Taoist nun Shirkuizi, who used to live in the mountain god temple of Nanshan. At this point, Lao Dao's eyes turned red and he gritted his teeth. That Li Yunxin, who doesn't use him? In the city of Wei, he used my cultivation companion's clone to set up a trap and tricked Taoist Yunzi. At that time, I felt a chill in my heart, thinking that one day, he might really do that kind of thing. Sure enough, when the city of Wei was breached, my cultivation companion was seriously injured and fell into a coma. She was about to die. Hey he. At this point Lao Dao choked with sobs. He used to draw a body for a lonely soul. He had the ability to make that soul possess a body. At the very least, he could put the soul into his dragon palace. At least his soul wouldn't be taken away and scattered. But he only told me that his previous method of drawing a body was not good. He wanted to solve this problem after he figured out a better method. Lao Dao, I'm not knowledgeable, but I'm not stupid. How could I not know that he doesn't trust anyone? Lu Lao Dao took a deep breath and narrowed his eyes. He doesn't trust me either. I know many secrets of his. So he used my cultivation companion to threaten me. He knows that as long as she doesn't come back to life, I have to be loyal to him. Hey, how about now? Her body is gone, and her soul is scattered. If it weren't for him, Shirkuizi would still be meditating in the Taoist temple. If it weren't for him, Lao Dao, I would still be safe and sound in the city of Wei. How many of my friends and acquaintances are there? Because he first attracted the demons, and then attracted the murderous Taoists. They are all destroyed. At this point Ming Jinzi no longer smiled, but slightly frowned. None of these things seemed to be fake. The three of them all knew a lot about Li Yunxin. Their information came from the two sages. And the information from the two sages were omnipotent. So it was not strange that they knew these inside stories. Gui Yuanzi sneered and said, he said these things just for. However, the words of the headmaster were interrupted by Lao Dao. Li Yunxin hasn't escaped far now. He is near Dongting. Sendo, if you send people to search carefully, you will definitely find his trace. He also has 2 treasures with him. I heard that they are 2 legendary octave ancient scrolls, but he refused to show them to me. A few days ago, the adopted daughter of the Golden Rock King came to Dongting to get the dragon soul. But she took away the only daughter of the Lord Dongting. Bai Yunxin is quite affectionate to Li Yunxin. Sendo, you should also be wary of him seeking refuge with the Golden Rock King. And Li Yunxin's folding fan. Lao Dao looked around as he said this, as if he was looking for something. This time Gui Yuanzi didn't say anything. After a little hesitation, he turned his hand and took out the fan from his sleeve, saying in a low voice, "Are you looking for this?" Lao Dao turned his head and stared at that thing. Yes. This fan is a Ryatsu. This thing has another function. If the Sendo brought a painting Taoist in the true state, as long as the Taoist's wakin was poured into the painting, the situation around Dongting will be clear at a glance. Li Yunxin will have nowhere to escape. When he said the last few words, he gnashed his teeth. But at this moment, the 3 headmasters were really silent. This Taoist priest actually told them such a secret that they didn't know about. Could it be that what he said before was true? Chapter 337. However, they didn't have Taoist painting priest on this trip. There was a true realm Taoist painting priest in the grotto heaven. However, that guy was being watched closely, so how could they invite him? Even so, looking at Lao Dao's actions, they finally had some doubts in their hearts. Lao Dao claimed that he was only staying by Li Yunxin's side to survive. This made sense. He also said that Li Yunxin didn't treat him well, and even used his Dao companion to threaten him. This also made sense. In reality, everything he said so far was reasonable. It didn't matter if they believed it or not. And the three sect leaders also knew that words were sometimes the most useless thing to say. For example, Lu Laodao had said a lot at this moment. If he was really being coerced, and was of no use to them, then what was the point of keeping him alive? If what he said was against his will to save his life, but under such a situation, if it was still of some use, then what was the difference from telling the truth? Thus, the three of them exchanged glances. Ming Junzi said, "What you said sounds like the truth. In reality, it's of no use. Since he can survive the heavenly tribulation, maybe he isn't fated to die. I'll give you a chance." Lu Laodao didn't hesitate and said, "The three demon generals under Li Yunxin are currently at Baijin Ferry, 200 miles upstream of the Wei River. The day before yesterday, they came to me to report some news. Right now, they are recruiting troops for Li Yunxin. If the three Sendo send people to Baijin Ferry, they will definitely be captured in one fell swoop." Ming Junzi was slightly stunned and then smiled. "No wonder that demon Li Yunxin thinks highly of you. Now that I look at you, I know that you are a clever person. Talking to you is effortless." "Oh, 200 miles? Lu Laodao nodded. Ming Junzi looked at Gui Yuanzi and Chen Kongzi. "Who will go?" Chen Kongzi raised an eyebrow. "I'll just use my lightning escape to make a trip." Ming Junzi nodded. "Thank you." Before his voice could fade away, Chen Kongzi's figure suddenly turned into a thin purple lightning and shot straight into the sky. For mortals in the secular world, a distance of 200 li could be covered in a few days. However, to Chen Kongzi, it only took him a few breaths' time to transform into purple lightning and escape. Whether Lu Laodao was telling the truth or not, they would know in a quarter of an hour. At that time, he could decide his life and death. But it was not even a quarter of an hour. 2 breaths after Chen Kongzi fled, a loud sound suddenly came from the west. A brilliant firework rose high into the sky and exploded. That was the warning signal from the High Clear Pill Cauldron sect's disciple. Ming Junzi and Gui Yuanzi suddenly turned their heads and stared at Lu Laodao. Chen Kongzi just fled to catch the demon general in his mouth, and Li Yunxin appeared here. This old thing was luring the tiger away from the mountain. The oppressive eyes of the two masters in the state of truth made Lu Gongzhan's figure shrink, as if it was difficult for him to even breathe. However, he still showed no fear on his face. He just turned his head and looked to the west. In the west was the vast Dongting swamp. The light of the water reached the sky and stretched as far as the eye could see. Right now, these three people could see that on the surface of the lake in the west, a body as thick as a middle finger flashed on the surface of the water and quickly dived into the water. However, the surging waves surged in all directions. The disciple on the surface of the lake, who gave the warning, was like a speck of dust, almost swept into the water by the monstrous waves. Such a long distance, the body was still as thick as a finger. It could be seen how huge that thing was. If it wasn't the real body of Li Yunxin, what else could it be? However, after a glance, Lu Laodao shouted, "Two Sendoes, don't be fooled. That is not the real body of Li Yunxin, or some huge water monster in the lake." How could they listen to his nonsense? Ming Junzi and Gui Yuanzi snorted coldly. They rose to the sky and went straight to the place of the warning. The two of them flew close to the surface of the lake. The surging airwaves blasted a long trail on the surface of the water, as if there were 2 fast big fish under the water. Ming Junzi pinched his fingers and patted the back of his head. Immediately, a green flying sword was spat out from his mouth. This flying sword grew with the wind, emitting a brilliant light that couldn't be looked at directly. It was like a small sun appeared on the surface of the lake out of nowhere. It made the sky dim. As soon as Ming Junzi released his flying sword, Gui Yuanzi beside him raised his hand and shot a soybean-sized black pellet at the place where the dragon just appeared. Then they saw a strange scene on the lake. It was a soybean-sized pellet, but even the splashing water was much bigger than it. But once it entered the water, the originally dark green surface of the lake suddenly turned pitch black. It was not just a small piece, but a vast expanse of black that was beyond their sight. It was like a god pouring dye directly into Dongting from the sky. He even ignored the process of diffusion. As soon as the lake turned black, it immediately boiled. This boiling was not because of anything else. but because hundreds of millions of fish and shrimps in the lake died in an instant and rushed to the surface of the water at the same time. One breath ago, the lake was still green, but then it turned black in an instant. After another breath, even the blackness disappeared. The dense corpses of fish and shrimps piled up layer after layer on the surface of the water in an instant. In the end, Dongting Lake disappeared as far as the eye could see. There was only a land, formed by the corpses of fish and shrimps, with an amazing stench. Then, a furious roar suddenly erupted from beneath the continent. This roar was like thunder, and also like the howl of a bull. Was it not a dragon roar? The corpses of fish and shrimps where the roar came from surged. It seemed that there was a giant beast struggling in the water in pain. Ming Jinzi looked away and shouted, "Go!" Boom! 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 A series of huge cone-shaped clouds exploded in front of them. The dazzling flying sword shot into the water like a bright electric light. Hundreds of millions of tons of poisonous water and rotten corpses were blasted into the sky by the power of this sword. A flower of death that could be recognized by the naked eye from hundreds of miles away bloomed in Dongting Lake. Just this blow, Dongting, which was hundreds of meters deep, was blasted to the bottom. A huge pit was blasted in the lake for a short time, and the lake water on the four walls didn't even have time to pour down to fill it. So at the bottom of the pit, a huge dragon body was nailed into the mud by Ming Jinzi's flying sword. Its head was directly penetrated, and most of it was gone. It was a head as big as a big house with one eye. Its body was still twitching, which was a dying struggle. Every time it twitched, thousands of tons of mud were swept into the sky. It was killed by Ming Jinzi with a sword. But the question was it so easy? The black water and corpses roared and filled the pit again. It took more than 10 breaths. The surging airwaves and water vapor spread dozens of miles away with a loud noise. Those disciples with weaker cultivation, who gathered here, didn't dare to get close at all. Once one was sucked into it, they would immediately perish, and their souls would be destroyed. However, Ming Jinzi and Gui Yuanzi stopped in the boundless black fog and looked at each other. Because they both saw that there were no scales on the dead body. It was actually something similar to a dragon's body, but actually had spots. And on the remaining half of its head, the two horns couldn't be seen. But the most important point about the description of Li Yunxin's real body was that it had 2 red horns on its head and a silver-white mane. The 2 perfected immortals were stunned for a moment and realized that before they attacked, Lao Dao said that was not Li Yunxin's real body, was actually true. And only then did Ming Jinzi feel a little lucky. He just wanted to crush Lao Dao to death with one finger. But thinking that there might be some unknown secrets on his body, he hesitated for a moment. Now it seemed that it was a wise move. Gui Yuanzi sighed slightly and waved his hand. So the black fog and black water that filled the sky instantly faded, and a black pill condensed in his hand again. Just like when it spread out, there was no process. I don't know where this water monster came from. Gui Yuanzi put the pill in his palm and said, "We can only look at the disciples who are searching around nearby." Halfway through his sentence, he suddenly paused and furrowed his eyebrows. They had originally left the magic treasure that carried the disciples who couldn't fly in the sky above the stone pillar. And at this moment, the ones who rushed to Dongting Lake with them were the disciples with higher cultivation levels. These magic treasures were all treasures that they had refined with their natal fire, so they had a natural connection with their masters. Although they were dozens of miles away, they could still control them, as if they were their own arms. And their thoughts were not slow at all. But at this moment, the two suddenly felt that the magic treasure was actually under a strong and fierce attack. Li Yunxin. The two masters shouted this name at the same time. Without any hesitation, they turned around and rushed toward Mount June again. But the power of Ming Jinzi's overbearing attack was really too great. The surging water mist covered the square garden for several miles. When the two finally broke through the thick fog and arrived high in the sky, they found that there were dozens of disciples who had flown in from all directions, but not a single one of them was left. Some of the magic treasures that flew in the sky were given to these disciples by them. The disciples' cultivation levels weren't high enough, so they hadn't completely refined it. Therefore, once the user died, the magic treasure would wander around for a while like a loyal dog that had lost its master. Since the High Heaven Sword sect cultivated the sword Dao, most of the magic treasures they used were flying swords. Before this trip, Ming Junzi specially gave 5 of his outstanding disciples 5 water-repelling light-splitting swords. At this moment, he took a closer look. The 5 flying swords were still leisurely spinning in the air. And on each flying sword half of their bodies were standing straight. When they saw it, they spat out blood and fell down from the clouds. This meant that these disciples had actually been killed by Li Yunxin in an instant, 2 breaths ago, right next to the 2 sect masters. Her methods were swift and vicious, and she didn't even stop. She didn't even put away her magic treasures. Li Yunxin, Ming Junzi shouted again. But the last time he shouted this name, it was because he was shocked. But this time, he shouted this name. It was because he was shocked and angry. The disciples who cultivated to the state of the transcendent were not cabbages in the vegetable garden. Now that the sect's disciples who were at the state of the transcendent were almost all killed in a single encounter, how could he not be shocked and angry? There was nothing more to say. The 2 supreme leaders pounced ferociously towards the bright red Mount June in the distance with hatred in their hearts. They broke through the air as they made the magic gesture to retrieve their magic weapons. The disciples in the place of the outer fringe were all dead. If those disciples who were left on Mount June were to die as well, then they would truly be alone. But who would have thought that Li Yunxin was obviously seriously injured and should have only wanted to escape? But now he actually had the guts to come back. This demon was simply a lunatic. But when they made the hand signs, their hearts sank again. They didn't listen to their orders anymore. This meant that their magic treasures were seriously injured. The flow of spiritual energy was not very smooth. But that Li Yunxin clearly just arrived at Mount June. What did he use to destroy these 2 treasures? At this time, the 2 were already close to Mount June. They could see the appearance of the bright red mountain peak clearly. Sure enough, there was a powerful fiend celestial shrouded in faint golden mist fighting with dozens of disciples, who were controlling magic treasures to dodge left and right. And this demon god had a pair of blood-red antlers on his head that rose to the sky. Snow-white mane on his neck stood up, and his body was covered with pale green scales. Who else could it be but that Wei River Dragon King Li Yunxin? With just a glance, the disciples on the magic treasures fell down one after another like dumplings. Once they fell into the sea of lava, they didn't even leave a wisp of smoke, immediately disappearing without a trace. Looking at that Li Yunxin again, he held a golden treasure in his hand, which looked like a small sword, but also like a dagger. He used the demon energy on his body to force out an ordinary aura. Without the slightest bit of reason or technique, he just blindly slashed at the 2 magic treasures, one sword and the other magic treasures. The moment the black light that the disciples barely managed to activate came into contact with the sword aura he forced out, it was immediately smashed. Then, it fiercely hit the 3 magic treasures, causing another wave of heart-wrenching buzzing sound. Ming Junzi was so anxious that his eyes turned red. He shouted from afar, "Evil creature, don't run, eat my sword." He spat out his dazzling flying sword. But just as this sword was about 10 feet away from his body, Ming Junzi hastily stopped its momentum. This flying sword was called Cave Knight. It was extremely powerful, and its sword nature was fierce and unyielding. If he used this attack again, not to mention whether or not he could kill Li Yunxin, those disciples definitely wouldn't be able to live. Thus he hesitated for a moment. It was also at this moment that he saw from afar that Li Yunxin took advantage of the moment when the 3 magic treasures were temporarily forced away to throw something down. And then he shouted, "Come up!" This shout didn't seem to be directed at them, nor at the disciples on the 3 magic treasures. It should be directed at Lu Laodao on the stone pillar. So this demon had killed his way back just to save that Taoist. But the strange thing was that Lao Dao actually just stood on the stone pillar, raised his head and shouted a few curses, but didn't follow him. Li Yunxin seemed to be stunned. His body actually stopped in midair. Those low-level disciples took advantage of this opportunity, and once again rode on their magic treasures, charging forward without fear of death. 3 beams of black light converged, and in one breath, he was sent flying more than 10 feet away. At this moment, the 2 sect leaders finally arrived. Ming Jinzi and Gui Yuanzi raised their hands, and each threw out dozens of small swords and pills, which went straight towards Li Yunxin. This way River Dragon King finally came back to his senses. He turned his head back and fiercely glared at Ming Jinzi and Gui Yuanzi from a distance of several tens of feet. He stretched out his hand and pointed at them from afar, and the corners of his eyes seemed to be about to split open. "This debt, none of you can escape." After he finished speaking, a gust of sinister and terrifying demon wind suddenly rose in midair, carrying with it thick dark clouds, whimpering and sweeping across a large area. In this wind and clouds, Li Yunxin revealed his dragon body that was 100 feet long. Thunder and lightning crackled, the violent demonic power overflowed in all directions, and the small swords and pills that were attacking were swept away in all directions with crackling sounds. With another violent long cry and a wave of his tail, the remaining dozens of disciples on the 3 magic treasures were all swept into the magma by him. Then, this Qi-Wen no longer looked at Lu Laodao on the stone pillar, whistling straight towards the east. Everything happened in 3 breaths. When Ming Jinzi and Gui Yuanzi finally arrived above the stone pillar and took back their respective magic treasures, their sect's disciples, including the disciples under the sect leader of the 9 Heavens Divine Thunder sect, Cheng Kongzi, were all killed. "Li Yunxin, I will definitely cut you into 1,000 pieces." Ming Jinzi roared towards the sky. The depression in his chest almost made him spit out a mouthful of blood. Originally, it was the 3 sects that joined forces to attack this demon and heavily injured him. But now, not only did he escape, but he also killed all the disciples under him. Since the establishment of their sect for thousands of years, when had they ever suffered such a tragic loss? But they couldn't catch up. Qi-Wen was originally a dragon. He could fly on the clouds and the mist. Flying in the air was almost an innate ability of dragons, not to mention activating demon power with a 1,000 feet long dragon body. Hatefully, that cunning Li Yunxin came back to save Lao Dao and also to destroy their magic treasures. Without these 2 magic treasures, how could they chase after Long Sun? Cheng Kongzi even went to Bai Jindu. But even if he came back, did he dare to chase alone? If he had the confidence to kill this demon alone, why did he gather the power of the 3 sects to attack him with divine thunder, instead of rushing straight into the school of the Emperor's Star to capture him? Ming Jinzi was filled with hatred, and Gui Yuanzi was filled with even more hatred. The encounter just now was the first time they saw what Li Yunxin looked like, but the crazy and violent aura of the demon had already been deeply imprinted in their hearts. They knew that this was indeed not an ordinary big demon who occupied land and ruled as a king. Since he couldn't catch up and didn't dare to, he looked down at Lu Laodao. With nowhere to vent his anger, he suddenly stretched out his hand and pulled Lao Dao up out of thin air. With a little strength in his palm, he pinched him until his face turned purple, and he could only spit out air like a fish out of water. "What did that demon say to you just now? What did you say to him? Is this your evil plan?" Chapter 338. Lao Dao's neck is in his palm. How can he speak? He reaches out to break Gui Yuanzi's fingers, but he can't move them. Seeing him struggling for a while, his face has turned purple, and his movements are getting weaker and weaker. Ming Jinzi, who is looking at him coldly, says, "Let him go first. Listen to what he has to say." Gui Yuanzi grits his teeth. What else is there to say? He must be a spy. Ming Jinzi sighs. "Duanfang, don't forget. He told us before. That is not the real body of Li Yunxin." Gui Yuanzi is slightly stunned and turns to look at Ming Jinzi in surprise. He calls himself Duanfang. Duanfang is his courtesy name. In fact, the headmasters of Lingshu Sword School and Danding School of Shangqing are rare best friends in Daotong and Kinzhou. They call each other by their courtesy names in private to show their closeness. Now Ming Jinzi calls him like this. Gui Yuanzi can only frown slightly. Do you really believe him? Listen to him. Ming Jinzi waves his hand. Lu Laodao gets rid of Gui Yuanzi's palm and is taken to the front of the headmaster of Lingshu Kenzo. I did say. Lao Dao gasps a few times as if he is suffocating and squeezes out this sentence. He seems to be not used to standing in the nothingness. He is in a flurry, and looks a little embarrassed. However, there is no fear on his face. Instead, he is a little proud and satisfied. After saying this, he reaches out and points to the lake. In the past, the dragon's soul stayed in Dongting. Every year, it would give birth to 1 or 2 evil flood dragons and water monsters. The previous one was probably a new water monster a few days ago. However, the 2 Sendo are too impatient. Ming Junzi doesn't speak, but stares at him carefully. After watching for a while, he asks, "Just now, what did Li Yunqin say to you?" "He came back to save me." Lao Dao shook his head with a pleased look on his face. "How could I enter the tiger's den again? If not for the 2 Sendo's timely return, I would have been taken away by him again." That demon's expression at that time. Heh, it was really interesting. Gui Yuanzi snorted coldly. Nonsense. However, Ming Junzi thought for a moment and nodded slightly. Oh, now Li Yunqin has brutally killed dozens of my disciples and committed another heinous crime. And you are Li Yunqin's former servant. Is there any reason why I shouldn't kill you? The sect master of the Ling Su sword sect had been furious just a moment ago, but now, he had calmed down a lot. This sudden change was a little strange. Thus, Gui Yuanzi finally realized that Ming Junzi seemed to really believe that this heretic had something worth paying attention to. But he himself did not think much of it. What good could the heretical ways of the fiendish demons do? However, with this opportunity, Lu Laodao finally heaved a sigh of relief. He smiled slightly. I still have that Li Yunqin's unique secret method. I can tell Sendo about it. Ming Junzi raised his eyebrows. Unique secret method. That Li Yunqin cultivates the path of painting. I cultivate the path of swordsmanship. What do I need his secret method for? Lao Dao didn't panic and shook his head lightly. It's not this method. It's Li Yunqin's heart study. This thing. I can't explain it clearly for a moment. This can be considered a secret method created by Li Yunqin himself. He is arrogant, so he named it heart study after himself. Not only can cultivators cultivate it, demons can cultivate it, and mortals can also cultivate it. It doesn't need any medicinal pills with aptitude. If there must be a difference, it's just that those with good aptitude advance faster, while those with poor aptitude advance slower. But as long as you put your heart into it, you will gain something. Gui Yuanzi sneered disdainfully. Even if it's true, since everyone can cultivate it, what good thing can it be? Lu Gongzan turned his face to look at him. This Sendo is looking at me. Could it be that he still hasn't realized? What use does that heart study have? His bold direct gaze and question caused the 2 sect masters to be slightly stunned. But they had already looked at Lu Laodao for a long time, and had already examined his body. There wasn't anything special about his body, so what was there to be aware about? Seeing them frown slightly, Lu Laodao smiled. It's already been an hour. An hour ago, the 2 Sendo firmly believed that I was that Li Yunqin's lackey. And at that time, I was seriously injured and on the verge of death. Such a heretic with such a low level of cultivation actually lived until now under the eyes of Sendo. And during this time, the 2 disciples of Sendo were harmed by Li Yunqin, but I was still alive. Didn't the 2 of you realize that this matter isn't normal? Ming Junzi seriously thought for a while and said, You should have died long ago. Gui Yuanzi snorted coldly. But relying on clever words and beauty to survive until now, Lu Laodao still smiled in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. This is that Li Yunqin's heart study. Even the 2 Sendo didn't realize what methods I used. But they felt that I should be spared, right? So the 2 were silent. After a moment of silence, the cold smile on their faces finally disappeared. It's a little interesting. Ming Junzi lightly shook his head. Then how much of his heart study did you learn? 3 points. But with Sendo's wisdom, he can see through a small part of a leopard. This 3 points is enough for Sendo to see through Li Yunqin's tricks in the future. Ming Junzi turned to look at Gui Yuanzi. Gui Yuanzi looked at Lu Laodao again and waved his hand. I'm not interested. Ming Junzi then looked at Lao Dao. Okay. For the time being, We'll wait for Sect Master Chen Kongzi to return. If we really capture the demons under Li Yunxin as you said, you can follow me back to Yunshan. Lao Dao straightened his body in the void and solemnly bowed to Ming Jinzi. After this bow, a low rumble of thunder suddenly rang out from the west. Then, a figure shot over like lightning, setting off a strong wind that almost blew Lu Lao Dao into the sea of lava. It was Chen Kongzi, the sect master of the Nine Heavens Divine Thunder sect, who went to Baijin Ferry to capture the demon general. He stopped and stared at the surroundings. His voice was like the sound of bells and drums. Where are my disciples? Where are my treasures? Gui Yuanzi sighed softly and took out the Dharma treasure that he had left here previously, which carried his disciples, and returned it to him. That Li Yunxin came here. He showed his dragon form, and our magic treasure was destroyed. We couldn't catch up with him. We could only watch him go east. Chen Kongzi suddenly frowned. You just sat and watched him escape? Huh? Hey. Such extraordinary shame and humiliation. Hey, you guys. I'll go catch him right now. After he said this, he turned around and was about to escape again. Gui Yuanzi and Ming Jinzi knew that he cultivated thunder magic. Although the thunder escape technique couldn't last long, it could move freely within a radius of 1,000 miles like thunder and lightning, far faster than ordinary cultivators. But if he wanted to chase alone, Ming Jinzi immediately stopped him. Senior brother, don't be impulsive. Senior brother, did you forget? That Li Yunxin is a fiendish demon. Fiendish demons have stronger fleshly bodies than us human cultivators. Now he is also a dragon. That is a demon among demons. His strength is even more incomparable. And he cultivates Taoist magic. Although the Taoist magic of painting is not mainstream, it is still the divine heart technique that the two sages approved of. Senior brother, think about the Nine Heavens Divine Thunder again. We gathered the power of our three sects to activate that magic treasure together. That demon actually used his magic treasure and body to resist it. This kind of strength, although he is in the true realm, senior brother, if you go alone, I'm afraid you will be in danger. Don't let your guard down against 100-year-old Tao fruit. It would have been better if he didn't say this. Now that Chen Kongzi heard this, he was even more furious. A demon? Why are the two of you so afraid? Gui Yuanzi sighed. The disciples of the two of us previously fought with that Li Yunxin. Bah! Chen Kongzi had already turned hostile due to anger. Without saying anything more, he rode on lightning and disappeared into the horizon with a hum. But after Chen Kongzi escaped, these two sect masters actually didn't move. They looked at each other and were silent for a while. Then Ming Jinzi said, he can't get over it. Why bother? Gui Yuanzi smiled slightly mockingly. If you didn't say those words just now, he wouldn't have taken it so hard. But indeed, why bother? Right now, all the Kinzo sects and grotto heavens of the world want to find that Li Yunxin. If he risked his life to chase after him, even if he risked his life, he could seriously injure Li Yunxin. If Li Yunxin escaped from our three sects' territory, wouldn't it be like making a wedding dress for someone else? The two of them spoke as if there was no one else around. Lu Lao Dao listened quietly at the side. Hearing this, he suddenly clapped his hands. So that's how it is. So that's how it is. It had been a very long time since someone had the guts to interrupt so rudely when two sect masters were talking. But perhaps because his performance today was too strange, and gave these two sect masters too many surprises, he actually wasn't casually slapped to death. Instead, Ming Jinzi turned to look at him with interest. What do you know? Lao Dao was calm and unruffled in the midst of the chaos. He narrowed his eyes and said slowly, if I were Lao Dao, I'd say that Sendo just used a psychological method. That's why that Sendo rode on lightning and left. As for why he used such a psychological method, I guess. Right now, Daotong and Kinzo are all under the orders of the two saints to surround and kill that demon Li Yunxin. But Lao Dao once heard Li Yunxin say that the sects of the world are not of one mind. For example, in our Qing kingdom, there is the Lingshu sword sect, the Shangqing Danding sect, and now we know there is also the Jiuxiao Divine Thunder sect. 36 paradises and 72 sections. The masters can be above the common people, but the disciples can't. They will always need some resources. Since they need resources, they will always need to divide the world's power. I think the area around Qing Kingdom belongs to your 3 sections. The reason why the 3 Sendo used all their strength earlier was presumably to kill Li Yunxin in one blow. What they were most afraid of was the current situation, only seriously injuring him, and then letting him escape. If he escapes like this, and escapes from your territory, wouldn't that be letting others take advantage of it? Lao Dao thought. The 2 saints must have promised some treasure for you to be so envious. Ming Junzi looked at Gui Yuanzi and smiled. This Taoist has some good eyes. Gui Yuanzi huffed coldly, and didn't say anything. But Lu Lao Dao restrained his expression and lowered his voice. Next, it is Lao Dao's theory of condemnation. The 2 Sendo must first forgive my capital crime before I can speak. Hearing his words, Gui Yuanzi looked at him with surprise. Condemnation theory? He thought again. Okay. Forgive your crime. Let's hear it. Lu Lao Dao took a deep breath. Daotong and Kenzo's practice is about abandoning emotions and abandoning desires. But the 2 Sendo call each other by their characters. Presumably their friendship is not shallow. So they plan to use the Jiuxiao Divine Thunder Sex Magic Treasure to take down Li Yunxin in one blow with the force of lightning. But they failed. Not only did they fail, but they also suffered heavy losses. Lao Dao. I don't know to what extent the internal strife within the seemingly harmonious Daotong and Kenzo has reached, but I know it is certainly not a good thing. Since they lost and knew they couldn't get Li Yunxin, then they had to find some advantages from other places. Then, perhaps the Sendo knew that the person they were chasing just now had a fiery temper. So he purposely said those words. Once they ran into Li Yunxin, and the 2 sides started to fight. If Li Yunxin killed him, the Qing Kingdom, which originally belonged to 3 factions, could now be taken in by 2 factions? Even if the Jiuxiao Divine Thunder sect had a new sect leader, they didn't have any disciples. It would be extremely difficult to have the 2 of you spit out what you ate. Lao Dao, am I speaking the truth? Ming Junzi and Gui Yuanzi met each other's eyes. Then Ming Junzi smiled. You also deduced these things from your studies of the mind. Lu Lao Dao also smiled. It is nothing more than a strange and obscene skill. But have the 2 of you, Sendo, never thought of other things? Other things. For example, being more proactive. Lu Lao Dao lowered his voice again. There are only 3 left. No one saw it. If that Li Yunxin only heavily injured that sect leader, why don't the 2 of you take the opportunity? Ming Junzi furrowed his brows abruptly. How dare you? Lao Dao immediately stopped and spread his hands innocently. Sendo, forgive me. Sendo had previously promised to forgive my sins. Gui Yuanzi laughed coldly and looked at Ming Junzi. Do you see? In the end, this evil Taoist is an evil Taoist. His thoughts are unfathomable, and he will do anything. Do you really want to keep him alive and keep him by your side? Ming Junzi stared coldly at Lao Dao for a while and snorted. Keep him first. Let's see what other tricks he has up his sleeves. But after saying this, he and Gui Yuanzi fell silent for a while. Then the 2 of them looked at each other. Cheng Kongzi had left for less than a quarter of an hour. If they followed, perhaps they would really be able to catch up. Then they fell silent for a while. Then, Ming Junzi opened his mouth. Duanfeng, we should go and take a look together. After all, we are of the same path. Moreover. He looked at Lu Lao Dao. I still haven't asked him if he has obtained that by Jinda Demon General. Gui Yuanzi hesitated for a while, and also looked at Lu Lao Dao. He nodded without saying a word. The atmosphere seemed a little strange. So, the 2 sect leaders silently folded their sleeves. Lu Lao Dao was pulled into the sky and sped east with them. Chapter 339. Cheng Kongzi, full of anger, chases Li Yunxin with the method of thunder escape. There is no chance for him to catch up with him. This is not a journey for mortals. There are only 1 or several shortcuts. Dongting is surrounded by boundless wild forests. The towering ancient trees are lush. Besides, Li Yunxin can walk in the sky or in the water. He can even hide in the forest. It is not easy to find him. However, today, luck seems to be on the side of the head of the 9 Heavens Divine Thunder School. He rushes more than 500 miles in one breath. Then he shows up in the lightning. He adjusts his Reiki and runs away. At this moment, he finds a black spot on the horizon. The great Dongting Lake has been left behind. Now it is a dark green forest under them. The sun hangs high in the sky. The sky is so blue that it looks like water is about to drip out. The sky is blue, the ground is green, and the sun is shining between heaven and earth. Therefore, the spot on the horizon is particularly eye-catching. Cheng Kongzi's heart jumps. He adjusts his breath for 3 seconds, and then grits his teeth to rush away. He is sure that it must be Li Yunxin. After another 3 seconds, the figure finally becomes clear. A huge cloud of mist was also moving quickly, and there were occasional flashes of lightning in the cloud, like bright white snakes. If you look at it carefully for a long time, you will find that the cloud is not pure white. There seems to be something huge hidden in it, which makes it slightly dark. From time to time, faint golden mist would rise from the dark clouds. It was a very beautiful sight. Cheng Kongzi knows that the blood of dragons is golden. He has caught up with Li Yunxin. At this moment, there is only one number in his mind, 46. He takes 46 disciples with him on this trip. Lu Gongzan is right. Daotong and Kenzo also have a division of influence. However, their division is very different from the schools in Jianghu, because there is a place called Yunshan in the world. The cloud mountain was suspended high in the sky. It was a floating mountain. The two saints live on Yunshan. Most of the leaders of various caves and schools also live on Yunshan all year round. The cloud mountain was incomparably huge. It was a stone fortress. It extended in all directions and had countless halls. No one seemed to know how many rooms and passageways there were in the cloud mountain, and no one knew how many people the cloud mountain could hold. The population of Cloud Mountain was mainly composed of 3 groups. Apart from the 2 sages, the first group consisted of the sect masters, sect leaders, and the elite disciples who came with them to run errands or stay here for a long time. The second part was the Tao children that were born from the cultivator couples. These Taoists grew up and cultivated on Cloud Mountain. They were close to the core of Daotong and Kenzo, and thus had the most resources and conveniences. Most of the Taoists were assigned to the Grotto Heavens, or sects that their parents belonged to. Only a few of them would change sections. Very few of them belonged to no sect, and they were pure Cloud Mountain people. The third group consisted of mortals. Very few mortals were lucky enough to come to Cloud Mountain in the beginning. In fact, it was hard to say if they were lucky or unlucky, because if they could not cultivate, they could only stay on Cloud Mountain and serve the immortals for the rest of their lives. Immortals lived long lives and aged slowly. On the other hand, these mortals were like weeds, their time passing by quickly. However, the Great Way was heartless. Who would care about their feelings? In fact, as these mortals slowly multiplied, their numbers became the largest. However, almost no one in the world knew of their existence. The cultivators would not even mention it. It seemed that in the eyes of many cultivators, the existence of mortals on Cloud Mountain, to a certain extent, tarnished the glory of the Xianmen. When the Taoists of Cloud Mountain reached the perfect state, they were faced with a choice. They could either cultivate on Cloud Mountain for the rest of their lives, or they could leave the core of the Xianmen and go to the wild world below. The disciples who chose to stay became part of the sects that were permanently stationed on Cloud Mountain. The disciples who chose to leave had to go elsewhere, to the Grotto Heavens and the Sect's Mountain, in the secular world. For example, the Jiuxiao Thunder sect's sphere of influence included more than half of the Qin kingdom. Its mountain in the secular world was in the warm south of the Qin kingdom, about 1,000 miles away from Dongting. However, there was a long and towering Cloud Mountain range between the two. Thus, in the eyes of mortals, the distance was considered far. In the secular world, some knowledgeable and insightful people knew about the celestial mountains and blessed lands, referred to this kind of place. This time, Cheng Kongzi of the Jiuxiao Thunder sect had brought 46 disciples from the secular mountain of the Jiuxiao Thunder sect, located in the Crimson Cloud Mountain, 1,000 miles away. Although these disciples were cultivators raised in the wild world, to Cheng Kongzi, they were closer to him than the Taoists who were permanently stationed on Cloud Mountain. He had to stay on Cloud Mountain for 5 or 6 months a year. Firstly, he served and protected the 2 sages in Cloud Mountain in name. Secondly, the closer he was to the 2 sages, the more likely he was to get good stuff. In history, it was not as if there had never been a precedent of a sage suddenly passing on some kind of mysterious divine ability to a cultivator by his side. If Li Yunxin knew about the strange relationship between the leaders of the various grotto heavens, the 2 sages and Cloud Mountain, he would probably say, in fact, it was very similar to the relationship between some kings and lords in the West in his world. The lords all had fiefdoms under their names. However, the lords might not always stay in their fiefdoms. Instead, they would gather in the capital or the king's castle. The nobles, on the other hand, would send their children to the palace to serve the king. To a certain extent, this was also very similar to the Taoists of Cloud Mountain. Therefore, in Cheng Kongzi's opinion, the disciples of the Jiuxiao Thunder sect who stayed on Cloud Mountain, they were all people who didn't experience much in the world. They only knew how to cultivate and were spoiled since childhood. Their parents might be former cultivators of their own sect, or disciples of other sections. The relationship between them was complicated. Compared to the cultivators in the secular mountain, almost all of them were treasures that couldn't be touched. What about the disciples in Crimson Cloud Mountain? Most of them were people from the secular world who obtained immortal fate, and were brought into the sect by him, or his disciples to cultivate. They knew how to respect others, how to be grateful, and how to be loyal to himself. Now these 46 cultivators were all killed by Li Yunxin. To Cheng Kongzi, this was equivalent to cutting off his arms. How could he not hate this? Therefore, as soon as he got closer, he raised his hand and once again took out his treasure, the Jiuxiao Thunder. He shouted, "Demon, where are you going?" As soon as he shouted, the small dark cloud in his hand also increased in size, and actually became as big as his body. In an instant, several electric arcs hissed, and struck straight at the cloud in front, where Li Yunxin was hiding. Originally, he was prepared to have another hard fight. Who knew that just these several electric arcs would be able to disperse the mountain-like cloud? The thick fog suddenly surged, and the entire sky was shrouded by a hazy mist. And the huge figure that was hiding in the cloud disappeared in an instant. Cheng Kongzi knew that Li Yunxin must have transformed into a human or a demon, and was hiding in the fog in an attempt to escape. How could he give his opponent this opportunity? He activated the spiritual power in his palm, and the magic treasure, the Jiuxiao Thunder, increased in size again, turning into a ring-shaped dark cloud that surrounded him. Then, hundreds of purple electric arcs exploded in all directions with a rumble. The air was filled with thick mist, and this mist helped the electric power. The electric arcs instantly weaved into an electric net, and the electric net extended even further. Finally, a muffled grunt was heard. Found him. Cheng Kongzi's brows stood erect. Immediately from his sleeve he sprinkled a sky full of shiny steel beads toward that direction. The steel balls tore a path in the fog like a storm, and then exploded with a rumble. Loud noises reverberated in the air. Even those towering ancient trees hundreds of meters below were destroyed by the blast from the sky. Not to mention the clouds in the sky. In an instant, they were completely driven away. Finally, that Li Yunxin was revealed. Cheng Kongzi's previous thunderous attack seemed to have succeeded. Or maybe he was injured by the thunderstorm on Mount Jun. Li Yunxin revealed his god-devil form. However, the dense scales on his body were now broken, and more than half of his body was covered in something that looked like gold foil. This was probably his blood. The blood of dragons was golden, and when it dried up, it looked like gold. These were considered minor injuries, but the serious injury was on his back. From his neck to his waist, there was a huge gap. One could even see the dark spine inside. The blood seemed to have dried up. His pale muscles were like hardened plaster, and occasionally some golden stains would seep out. But his spirit seemed to be fine. Li Yunxin didn't stop, and continued to fly away. And that Cheng Kongzi was also chasing after him. So from the looks of these two people, it looked like they had stopped. The heavily injured dragon's son glanced at Cheng Kongzi from afar, and let out a hoarse but arrogant laugh. "Daotong and Kenzo want to deal with me, And they sent trash like you? Cheng Kongzi kept his mouth shut. He didn't use talismans earlier, and directly used his divine ability, which had already consumed some spiritual energy. And now he was accumulating energy again, so that he could use the lightning escape technique to intercept that Li Yunxin. He didn't say anything, so Li Yunxin didn't say anything either. With a flip of his palm, he took out a few jade bottles from who knows where. He didn't even have the patience to pull out the cork, and directly used his sharp nails to cut it open. Then he poured the pills inside into his mouth like he was eating candy. The distance between the two wasn't far, so Cheng Kongzi could see those jade bottles clearly, and felt that they looked familiar. Thinking again, he understood. Li Yunxin must have stolen them from the Shangqing Danding sect's disciple, after he ambushed the disciples of the 3 sections. This meant that Li Yunxin looked arrogant, but in reality, he was already an arrow at the end of its flight. First, he was struck by the heavenly thunder, and then he ran for hundreds of miles without stopping. Just now, he was struck by the purple thunder bead. Right now he couldn't move fast anymore, so he had no choice but to eat those things as he ran, hoping to quickly recover some energy, so that he could escape again. Chapter 340. He was overjoyed when he found out about this. He felt the spiritual power in his ocean of qi and mountain of snow surging, so he didn't care about accumulating anymore. He made a sign with his hand, and with a buzz, he turned into a bolt of lightning and shot straight towards Li Yunxin. His escape technique was very similar to the shadow shifting technique. One moment he was here, and the next moment he appeared behind Li Yunxin. But when he ran out of spiritual energy and reappeared, he found that Li Yunxin had also used all her strength to rush forward for a distance. The two of them had returned to the previous situation. However, the dragon son was barely holding on, and it seemed to affect his injuries. The long wound on his back was torn open, and a large amount of golden mist splashed in the air. He started to pour pills into his mouth again. However, things like medicinal pills, the body would eventually get sick of using them too much. The pills he had were also limited. How long could he last? That was what Cheng Kongzi thought. So he didn't give up. He just stared at him silently, and used his technique again, determined not to let him go. But Li Yunxin seemed to be angry. He turned his head as he ran, and stared at the sect leader fiercely. I don't have time to deal with you now. You better turn around and go back. When I come back, I'll kill you. If you continue to chase me recklessly, I'll send you to see your celestial being. His words were full of vigor. Unfortunately, as soon as he finished speaking, he spat out a mouthful of golden blood and coughed a few times. Cheng Kongzi was even more delighted. His eyes turned, and he suddenly had a plan. He rolled his sleeves and suddenly took out a small corpse. The corpse had a sharp mouth and a thin tail. It looked like a house mouse. Cheng Kongzi sneered amidst the whistling wind. Li Yunxin, take a look at what this is. After that, he raised his hand and threw the thing over. But the two of them were as fast as a shooting star. As soon as the little thing left their hands, it was blown to the back by the strong wind. But the eyesight of a cultivator was different from that of a mortal. Even though they were far away, Li Yunxin could still see it clearly. Then his expression changed, but he gritted his teeth and said, You want to scare me with this thing? Cheng Kongzi burst into laughter. This thing? Hey, that thing called itself the Green Dragon Emissary, and said that his Taoist name was Shuk. When I caught him, he tried to hurt me, but I killed him with a casual jolt. After saying this, he took out another rabbit corpse and threw it forward. Look, who is this? This time, Li Yunxin was prepared and immediately reached out to grab it. But because of this slight pause, the distance between him and Cheng Kongzi narrowed considerably. As soon as he held the cold, stiff corpse in his hand, he knew. Although he had returned to his original form after death, there was still some demonic power left in his body. If it wasn't the demonic power cultivated by his water cloud force, what else could it be? Cheng Kongzi saw Li Yunxin's countenance turn greenish-gray in a split second. He laughed aloud in delight. Do you understand now? You scoundrel, at this moment, you only know how to run away in panic. Those demon generals under your command were all killed by me. But one escaped. After I catch you, I'll catch that one too and sacrifice it to my 46 disciples. Before he finished speaking, he suddenly heard a thunderous roar exploding in front of him. You're courting death. This voice was like thunder, really like thunder. The roiling wave of air pressed down with a bang, and it instantly blew Chen Kongzi, to the point his figure froze, and was almost blasted flying back. At that moment he was greatly alarmed. He thought that Li Yunxin was going to take the opportunity to escape again, but he didn't expect. The next moment, the fiendish demon opened its bloody mouth full of sharp fangs, turned around, and charged straight at him. He had already mustered all his strength to chase after it. Who would have thought that Li Yunxin really had the guts to come back? There was a distance of a few hundred feet between the two, but with their speed, the few hundred feet was nothing more than the distance between their hands and feet. With a loud bang, Li Yunxin's ferocious demonic body that was surrounded by clouds and mist and golden blood crashed right into Chen Kongzi. In just a split second, there was a burst of lightning. That purple, blue, white. It was already unclear whether it was the dragons of the Nine Heavens thunderfire that Li Yunxin unleashed, or the Nine Heavens godly thunder that was unleashed by Chen Kongzi's protective magic treasure. The intertwined lightning was like an exploding fire pill. In just a breath's time, it had swept across the heaven and earth within a radius of dozens of miles. The dense forest on the ground, the towering ancient trees, everything was turned into black charcoal in an instant. Then, they were shredded into the tiniest powder by the strong wind that came like a landslide and a tsunami. In the midst of this earth-shattering explosion, Long Sun's extremely violent roar could still be heard. Are you playing electric shock with me? Ha! This collision only happened in a split second. The next moment, a bolt of lightning suddenly rushed out, and a figure appeared more than 100 feet away. But it was not the seriously injured Li Yunxin, but Chen Kongzi, the headmaster of the Nine Heavens Godly Thunder sect, who was laughing loudly just a moment ago, was now in tattered clothes, covered in blood, and even his left arm was missing. There was only a piece of stubble left on his shoulder, as if it had been torn off by a sharp claw. The expression on his face was already one of shock, panic, and fear. That Li Yunxin actually dared to come back, and that seriously injured body was still so strong. However, the next moment, a body that looked like it was cast from steel suddenly pounced straight down from the sky full of lightning. With one blow, it blasted Chen Kongzi into the already charred forest below. There was another indescribable loud noise. The high-speed fall, and the high temperature caused by the collision ignited the already charred and torn forest. A huge fireball rose from the ground, and a huge amount of sand and stones were lifted into the sky like a huge wave. The rolling shock wave violently and brutally destroyed the dense forest, within a radius of hundreds of miles. A terrible mushroom cloud that was hundreds of meters high soared into the sky. And in the center of this terrible explosion, in the distorted air and then burned out, Li Yunxin's demonic body was pressing Chen Kongzi into a huge deep pit on the ground. Like a beast, he grabbed one of Chen Kongzi's arms and brutally tore it off. Do you like to chase? His voice was out of tune. It no longer sounded like a human voice, but more like the violent roar of a beast. His face was extremely distorted in the fire, as if he was a terrible demon god that appeared from the 9 levels of hell. However, Chen Kongzi's body was still at the level of a perfected master. Even though his snow mountain and Qi ocean were pierced by the sharp angle of Li Yunxin's knee, his consciousness was still not extinguished, and his body was still strong. Therefore, when Li Yunxin tore his arm again, he actually had to slowly tear off the extremely tough muscles, bit by bit, before he could tear it off. Chen Kongzi let out a terrible cry of pain. However, this cry of pain seemed to make the demon god's ferocious nature on his body even stronger. Why don't you chase me again? He opened his bloody mouth and let out an even more terrifying howl. Finally, he tore that right arm off as well. Chen Kongzi had already lost his mind from the pain. In the high temperature and fire that quickly burned his face into countless blisters, he opened his mouth and cursed. You demon, you have to. Ah! Halfway through his words, it suddenly turned into a series of screams. This was because Li Yunxin suddenly leaned over, and used his mouth full of fangs to tear his abdomen open. Before the blood of the perfected master had the time to spurt out, it had already been burnt to nothingness in the extreme heat of the explosion. But his 5 viscera and 6 bowels needed to hold on for a little longer, and so did his consciousness. He experienced the excruciating pain of having his organs torn apart by the demon god's fangs. Wah-ya-ya-ya-ya. Chung Kongzi's whole body was trembling from the pain. His words turned into a series of strange cries. But the voice stopped abruptly. Just as he opened his mouth to beg for mercy, Li Yunqin suddenly raised his head and bit off his head. With a puff, he spat it out like a peach pit. Without the screams of the true state Taoist, the whole world seemed to be quiet in an instant. Only the whirring flames and the buzzing sound of the air could be heard. In the soaring flames, Li Yunqin slowly stood up on Chung Kongzi's corpse. That corpse had been completely torn apart by him and turned into a pile of minced meat. And the huge and terrible wound on his back was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye in the burning flames. His shoulders slightly collapsed. He looked up at the sky and unconsciously grinned. Minced meat and golden blood flowed down from the corner of his mouth, as if a brutal prehistoric beast had just finished eating and was looking for the next target. At this moment, high up in the sky, far away, there were indeed 2 true state Taoists, Mingzhenzi and Gui Yuanzi. They arrived here 3 breaths ago and witnessed the scene of Li Yunqin tearing Chung Kongzi alive. And now, these 2 perfected spiritual masters stopped in the sky in a daze, looking at the figure of Li Yunqin in the raging flames on the ground. They only felt a terrible chill rising from their tailbones, climbing all the way to the Baihui point on the top of their heads. Although they were separated by a distance of thousands of meters, although Li Yunqin still looked like a small black shop in the center of the huge sea of fire from the sky, but that terrible momentum that was like a landslide and a tsunami still made the 2 of them feel difficult to breathe, as if their bodies were slightly trembling. Just like that, the terrible fierce beast and the 2 human cultivators looked at each other from a distance for 10 breaths of time. Then Li Yunqin suddenly roared with a violent and hoarse voice, "Come chase!" The 2 figures in the sky swayed slightly. After 2 breaths of time, the 2 perfected spiritual masters immediately turned into 2 streams of light, whizzing away. After a full 4 hours, the fire in the sea of fire was extinguished. However, an even fiercer fire had already spread in all directions. The sky was covered by the rolling thick smoke. As far as the eye could see, there was endless light and flames in all directions. Li Yunqin let out a low groan, and his tall demonic body fell to the ground with a bang. Chapter 341. Gui Yuanzi and Mingzhenzi ran for more than 400 miles before they dared to stop. In fact, the 2 perfected masters had never let their guard down against Li Yunqin. They were the ones who started the thunderbolt attack on Li Yunqin with the combined forces of the 3 sections. But the problem was that they didn't expect him to be so fierce. In the past, Li Yunqin used schemes, but they were just schemes after all. They were afraid of Li Yunqin's schemes and the traps he might set up, so they tried to solve the problem using the most direct method, pure violence. Only now did they realize one thing. He was a dragon son in the real state. When it came to violence, his violence was as frightening as his brain. Other people's brains were usually covered by their fierce martial strength, but this guy used his brain to make people ignore his martial strength. The scene before Chung Kongzi died still made these 2 perfected spiritual masters feel a chill down their spines. In fact, they weren't particularly afraid of death. But Chung Kongzi, a perfected spiritual master, the head of the 9 heavens godly thunder sect, was actually torn apart by the ferocious beast like Li Yunqin with his fangs and claws. His godly demon body was as tall as 2 or 3 times the size of a normal person. Chung Kongzi was like a hare or a lamb under his body. When the 2 of them bumped into each other, the 9th heaven thunderous fire of the dragon clan pierced through his snow mountain and ocean of chi. Demons were the best at close combat. Chung Kongzi was bewitched and actually chased after him. The 2 sect masters thought about this carefully, and then thought about how he would die without any honor. Who would be willing to die like that? Demons. Demons are demons after all. Once their ferocious nature was triggered, they couldn't be judged by common sense. They actually used such a reckless fighting method. Hiya. Gui Yuanzi calmed down, turned his head to look to the east and said in a low voice, "Don't be in the sky. Go down, go down." Ming Junzi didn't say anything to refute and followed his advice. Below them was also a vast wilderness, the trees blocking out the sky and the sun. In such an environment, the two sect leaders felt safer. They had to meditate for a while, think for a while, and come up with a plan for the next step. After all, that Li Yunqin is so ferocious. Ming Junzi muttered to himself and sighed in a low voice. Duanfang, we previously said that he would escape from our territory. Now do you think will he escape or still came back for us? He didn't say this out loud, because once he said it, even he himself would feel ashamed of his own cowardice. However, the Lingshu Sword sect and the Shangqing Pill Cauldron sect were on the border of the Qing kingdom. One was on the border between the Qing kingdom and the Yi kingdom. To cultivators and great fiendish demons, it was actually not considered far. He is already heavily injured, right? Gui Yuanzi frowned and thought for a while before he said, I think he went berserk just now and fought with his life on the line. If he really had any energy left, he would have killed his way to the heavens just now. Now that he thought about it again, perhaps he only looked fierce, but was actually extremely weak. I'm thinking, should we go back again? That headmaster Chung Kongzi, before he died, he probably thought the same. His words were cut off by someone else. It was none other than Lu Gongzan. Earlier, Ming Junzi had also brought Lu Gongzan into the sky. However, Lu Gongzan was in the emptiness realm, and his body was not as strong as a real person's. If he was exposed to the strong winds in the sky, he would probably be blown apart after traveling for a quarter of an hour. Thus, Ming Junzi had used the heaven and earth sleeve technique to trap him in his sleeve. Now that he was placed on the ground, this Lu Laodao seemed to have become the calmest person. Not only did he have the courage to interrupt Gui Yuanzi, but he also had the courage to swagger a few steps away. He found a lying, withered tree trunk in the shady green grass and sat down. He breathed as if no one else was around. It seemed that the fact that his old master, Li Yunqin, had torn Chung Kongzi apart alive made him a lot stronger. He was no longer in a sorry state like before. Gui Yuanzi suddenly turned his head and glared at him. The black hair behind his head spread out, making him look like an angry lion. When facing this Lao Dao, his nervousness and worry were all gone. His imposing manner flourished again. Good, you evil Taoist. Are you getting arrogant again? Aren't you afraid that we'll find your demon master and kill him? I think we can't let you live. Let's kill you here. After he finished speaking, he strode over and raised his hand, ready to strike at the top of Lu Gongzan's head. However, Lu Laodao was not in a hurry. He didn't even dodge. He stared at Gui Yuanzi, and a mocking smile appeared on his face. Sect leader, forget it. It's already this time. Laodao, I didn't ask you guys to go because I was afraid that you guys would die of stupidity. You won't really kill me, so there's no need to embarrass everyone. Gui Yuanzi's palm wind had already pressed down on the top of Lu Gongzan's head. However, at this moment, he was really stopped by Ming Junzi. Duanfang, I still have something to ask him. Thus, this sect leader of the Shangqing Pill Cauldron sect's face became extremely ugly. Naturally, he didn't really want to kill Lu Gongzan. Otherwise, just raising his hand would be enough. There was no need for him to walk like a dragon or a tiger. Ming Junzi gave him a way out of this embarrassing situation. His face turned red, and he stared at Lu Gongzan for a few more times. Then he snorted and suddenly turned around. Lu Laodao smiled. Sect leader Ming Junzi, do you know where your problem is? Ming Junzi frowned and took a few deep breaths. He also slowly calmed his emotions. Then he narrowed his eyes and said, Problem? Tell me. If you hit the nail on the head, then I wouldn't have spared your life in vain. Old Taoist Lu shook his head slightly and sighed softly. To say something, damned. Sect leaders, in front of that Li Yunqin, you guys are really like children. Gui Yuanzi wanted to glare again, but Ming Junzi raised his hand to stop him. Lao Dao then continued, I've seen Ling Kongzi before, and I've also seen Yunzi. That fairy Ling Kong, When I first saw her, her aura was terrifying, as if she was a celestial fairy. Looking at her, I only felt that she was unfathomable. Her words and actions were also confusing, and I only thought that it was the methods of celestials. But later, now when I think about what that fairy Ling Kong did, I understand. The reason why she is unfathomable and unfathomable is because her thoughts are too pure. Pure like a child's. But she also has great power. This is power and wealth that people in the secular world revere. When a person has power and wealth, then no matter how stupid or simple they are, others will also guess that she definitely wouldn't do such a stupid thing. There must be a deep meaning behind it. But in reality, if one can see through it, then power is useless. Li Yunxin can see through this point. That's why Fairy Ling Kong was played in the palm of his hand, and only understood when she died. Lu Gongzan sighed again, and looked left and right. Seeing a thin and long wild ginger, he stretched out his hand, and plucked off the red and green stems and leaves, putting it in his mouth to chew. As for that Yunzi, Lao Dao, I also have to admit that his schemes surpass others. Unfortunately, he's still a bit lacking compared to Li Yunxin. He and the two of you, and even Ling Kongzi, all made a mistake. They felt that Li Yunxin is a teenager, and what kind of knowledge could he have? Unfortunately, that Li Yunxin is a natural devil. Although he's only a teenager, who knows where he got his experience? Anyone who treats him as a child or a teenager will die a horrible death. I know that the three Sendo don't think they're stupid. When Lu Laodao said this, he paused slightly and spat out the wild ginger in his mouth. He suddenly laughed, hee. But for me, Laodao, among cultivators, the three Sendo are probably not stupid. But among the secular people, hearing this, Ming Junzi's brows gradually relaxed. He calmly pondered for a while, then said, "Continue. This seat will pardon you." Lu Gongzan cupped his hands at him loosely, but his tone was resolute and decisive. But among the secular people, the three of you, and even the cultivators of Daotong and Kenzo, can be regarded as stupid. Ming Junzi's eyelids twitched, and he turned his head to look at Gui Yuanzi. Gui Yuanzi's face was ashen, but he didn't say anything. He only snorted. Lu Gongzan continued as if there was no one else around. "This isn't your fault. In reality, it's like this: cultivators, Sendo, have profound Taoist arts and countless riches. There are many things that you've never cared about, but to us, the secular people, actually require a lot of brain power to do. For example, when I Lao Dao was poor, how much brain power did I use in order to seek food and clothing? I had to think about whether to go out and sell paintings the next day in the day or at night. Should I go to the south of the city or the north of the city? The Lin family of the south of the city lost their youngest son, and they were holding a funeral. That Lin family's master was a stingy person. If I went to his place, would he kick me out because he was in a bad mood? Or would he show some mercy because of the pain of losing his son, and instead buy all of my paintings to guard his house? I sell a pot of wine, and think about how much money I have in my pocket. Can I borrow a few large sums of money from that Mu Nanju? After borrowing that large sum of money, and seeing that it's almost the end of the year, can I say a few small words, and take advantage of that shopkeeper's good mood to use a painting to guard his house to make up for it? Because of all these, we poor people in the secular world always have endless worries in our hearts. Every step we take, trouble follows us. Those rich people also laugh at us, saying that we only know how to scheme for these things every day, that we're not magnanimous, and that we can't do great things. But those rich people, and even the Sendo, find it very difficult to understand that people like us, just to survive, we have exhausted our blood and sweat. If we're magnanimous, if we don't scheme, I'm afraid we won't even be able to survive. In the past, if we put our mind to this, we would indeed become shrewd people in the marketplace. For example, look at a woman. She is very eloquent, she is very sophisticated in the ways of the world. You change your countenance, you say something, she will be able to understand what you are thinking in your heart. But if you ask that woman to do big business, to study, to cultivate, she will become extremely stupid. The people of the world call this petty cleverness. I think all of you Sendo will also look down on this petty cleverness. Because your power is too strong. Lu Laodao raised his head with deep emotion and pointed his finger to the sky. Mortals think that you are in the sky. What you want is as easy as blowing off dust. Mortals need to calculate, they need to think. But you only need to speak, and there will be mortals to worship you. As the saying goes, one strong person can defeat 10 skilled people. Your power can disregard any schemes of the mortals. But now, there is such an anomaly like Li Yunxin. His petty cleverness can be considered top-notch among the mortals. But he still possesses the same formidable power as all of you Sendo. With these two combined two Sendo in front of him, are you considered stupid? Perhaps that Li Yunxin, after another 100 years, 1,000 years, will gradually become like all of you, because using power is far more convenient than using schemes. But it definitely won't be now. How did that sect master Chen Kongzi die? Speaking of it, it's too simple. Li Yunxin still had some strength left, but he didn't want to be entangled with him. Because if he was delayed by him, you too might catch up to him. 1 against 3, his chances of victory aren't great. But that Chen Kongzi actually tried to provoke him. You must know that Li Yunxin is a demon. If this demon was really so weak that he couldn't escape, would he allow himself to be chased to death? He should have turned back long ago and fought to the death. This logic, any slightly astute mortals would understand. But sect master Chen Kongzi didn't want to think too much. Because normally he doesn't need to think too much. So Li Yunxin turned back and killed him in an instant. What about you two? At that time, if he had immediately pounced down, he might have been able to kill Li Yunxin. Laodao, I'm guessing that Li Yunxin was really bluffing at that time. But the two of you actually turned around and left. If you left, then so be it. Why are you planning to go back now? Could it be that you've forgotten how that Chen Kongzi died? Lu Laodao stretched out his hand and pointed to the east. Tu Sendo, do you believe it? At this moment, that Li Yunxin didn't even run away, but stayed where he was and accumulated his energy. As long as the two Sendo go back, he has already obtained this breathing time, and has already made preparations. The two of you will definitely end up like that Chen Kongzi. Having said this, he threw away the already warm wild ginger in his hand and stood up. And I stopped the two Sendo not to fight for a chance to live. But, I've already pledged my allegiance to the Sendo. That rat spirit and rabbit spirit died because of me. Will Li Yunxin still let me go? Even now, the two Sendo still don't believe me. Aren't you stupid? At this time, Gui Yuanzi and Ming Jinzi seemed to be really dumbfounded. Perhaps they were like what Lu Laodao said, stupid. But it wasn't that they didn't care about life and death, success or failure. Lu Gongzhan's words were unpleasant to hear. But these unpleasant words were like a sharp snow-white blade, each blade drawing blood. After a long period of silence, Ming Jinzi let out a light sigh and raised his eyes to look at him. I won't pursue what you said for the time being. But there's one thing. When Chen Kongzi threw out those two corpses, Li Yunxin became violent. Does he really care about the demon generals under his command that much? Can he use this to lure him into a trap? For example, you? Lu Laodao chuckled twice and shook his head. Sendo's thinking is off again. In this world, if there's anyone who understands Li Yunxin the most, it's me. Sendo said that Li Yunxin suddenly became violent because he saw the corpses of the demon generals under his command? He actually hoped that Sendo thought this way. But in reality, it's not like that. Ming Jinzi seriously thought for a while. Then it's to confuse us and create this illusion? Lu Gongzhan was silent for a while and sighed. That's not it. Li Yunxin's violent rise was real. And his resentment was also real. But it wasn't because of the demon generals themselves, but because of himself. He didn't cherish the lives of demon generals that much. What truly made him angry was the feeling of not being able to control the life and death of the demon generals under his command. These two things seem similar, but there's a world of difference between them. That Li Yunxin only cares about himself. Even if he seems to care about others, it's still for himself. Ming Jinzi seriously thought for a while again, and sighed in understanding. What you said is somewhat reasonable. This person. He turned his head to look at Gui Yuanzi. Gui Yuanzi was also silent for a while. But you have to be careful. This Taoist isn't an ordinary person. In the world, perhaps there were only a handful of cultivators who could receive the evaluation of the Pill Cauldron sect master. And among the people of the secular world, this Lu Gongzan was definitely not rare. But in this kind of situation, this kind of evaluation wasn't a good thing. At the same time this signified approval, it also signified fear, vigilance, and a lingering, hidden worry related to life and death. Ming Junzi turned his head to look at Lu Gongzan again. Good. You, this Taoist, also have the root of wisdom and immortal fate. Although your background isn't clean, I'll temporarily take it that you were previously coerced by that demon Li Yunxin. But from today onwards, you must follow by my side. If I discover that you still have any shameful dealings with demons, I'll immediately take your life. Lu Gongzan took a deep breath, restraining his expression. Then he raised his hand and gave a deep Taoist salute, saying solemnly, "The two Sendo have a broad bearing and don't stick to one pattern. You're actually able to take Lao Dao's words to heart. That's something that demon Li Yunxin can't do, being able to follow by Sendo's side. How would I dare to have any improper thoughts? Lao Dao, my only wish is to be able to learn the profound Dao for the rest of my life, stay away from the disputes of the secular world, and live a peaceful and unfettered life." Ming Junzi faintly smiled. "Did you have a Taoist name in the past?" "My teacher in the secular world once bestowed the Taoist name, Primordius." Ming Junzi thought for a moment. "My High Heaven Sword Sect seniority. Oh, your Taoist name is also suitable. A teacher in the secular world is still a teacher, so leave your Taoist name. It's just that my sword sect doesn't have a suitable method for you to cultivate. But right now you're still a sinner. Only by eliminating that demon Li Yunxin can you clear your name. At that time, you'll naturally have a way to cultivate. But now, since you said that you understand Li Yunxin the best, what do you think we should do?" Lu Gongzan shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Sendo, my knowledge is limited, and I don't know what the current situation of Daotong and Kenzo is like. It's like a general leading a new army. The soldiers don't know the general, and the general doesn't know the soldiers. How can I think of a brilliant method? But really there's only one method, using force to break through ingenuity. When dealing with Li Yunxin, you absolutely can't compete with him in wits. If you can gather the strength of Daotong and Kenzo to work together to hunt him down, and not let him have a moment of peace, you can probably eliminate him as soon as possible." Ming Junzi really took his words to heart. He pondered for a moment and sighed slightly. "It's not easy. That Chen Kongzi hasn't had any disciples fall in his hands before, and he himself has never seen Li Yunxin. Thus, he underestimated the enemy. He's not the only one who thinks like that. And now Daotong and Kenzo." At this point, Gui Yuanzi coughed softly. Thus, Ming Junzi also stopped talking. "Let's leave this place first. Since the situation is like this, we have to avenge our disciples. Let's spread the news that Li Yunxin escaped with serious injuries to the world. Let's see how long he can hold on." Finished speaking, he waved his big sleeve. The three of them stuck close to the wild forest and headed west. Behind them, the dark clouds in the sky became thicker and thicker. The fire in the wild forest also became bigger and bigger. It was already autumn, although the forest still looked dark green. The branches and leaves of the trees were no longer as plump and full as in summer. The terrifyingly high temperature first roasted the branches and leaves near the fire line dry of water, and then more fuel fueled the fire, causing it to spread even faster. Because of the high temperature, the air waves that rose into the sky swept away a large amount of dust, which then gathered into thick clouds high up in the sky. Thus, there were white ashes and shards falling down. It was as if winter had come early and snow had fallen from the sky. This vast and boundless wild forest took up almost a tenth of the area of the Daqing state. It had grown for hundreds of thousands of years. How many billions of creatures lived in it? Now, these creatures had either died in the fire that filled the sky, were still fleeing in fear, or were completely unaware of the red god of death approaching in the distance. The source of the fire that spread from the center of the primeval forest was not ordinary fire. This forest was also boundless. It would be difficult for the mortal government, villages, and towns to immediately know that such a disaster had occurred. Thus, the fire grew larger and larger and stronger. After 10 days, it had become a great calamity that the Qing kingdom had not seen in 1,000 years. This fire that filled the sky first burned to the small border town in the north of the Qing kingdom, Changji. To the north of the Qing kingdom was the Yi kingdom. There was a natural geographical dividing line between the Qing kingdom and the Yi kingdom, the Tulan River. The town of Changji sat on the south bank of the Tulan River, separated from the north bank by less than 10 meters. This was also the width of the middle reaches of the Tulan River. In this world, this could not be considered a large river. The people of Changji relied on the wild forest to make a living. About 80 to 90% of the people in the town engaged in the logging industry. They cut down towering ancient trees from the wild forest and dragged them to the riverside to weave them into wooden rafts, using the relentless river water to transport the logs downstream. Now that it was autumn, it was already the end of September. In Changji town, this meant that there was still a little more than a month before the first snow fell. Then, the Tulan River would freeze, and they could rest for the winter. Before that, they could make another trip into the depths of the wild forest. Changji town had existed for 100 years. Although it would be replanted after it was cut down gradually, there was no longer any decent wood nearby. This decent referred to the thickness of 5 people holding hands around it. The rich families in the north called the wood of these trees 5 treasures. Only this was a high-grade item that could be sold for a price. The men heading into the forest had set off 8 days ago. Logically speaking, it would take at least half a month for the first batch of wood to be shipped out. However, this year, in the 11th year of the Zhongyuan of the Qing calendar, the men of Changji town had for the first time returned early. And so these panicked men also brought a terrible news. Chapter 342. The monstrous flames formed a wall of fire. Looking up, there were dark clouds, and the blue sky could not be seen. Looking to the left and right, it extended beyond the horizon, without an end. The terrible heat wave roasted the towering trees from dozens of meters away. Cold water splashed on them, even from dozens of meters away, would turn into extremely hot, transparent, superheated steam. In an instant, it could scorch human flesh, and pieces of flesh would fall from the skeleton. This terrible flame was pressing into Changji town, and judging from the speed of its advance, it would arrive within 5 days. It was impossible for human power to resist such a natural disaster. According to the experience passed down from generation to generation in this town, even the Tulan River could not stop the fire at this time. If they wanted to survive, there were only 2 choices. The first was to move the town. Changji town was surrounded by wild forests, and in fact, the town was almost wrapped in the forest. But now it was already autumn and winter was coming. What could they take with them? And where could they go in 5 days? The state capital in the north was not rich, and in winter, a large number of refugees would gather in the big cities to survive the few months. But even in a good year, dozens of unclaimed corpses would be found outside the big cities every spring. Not to mention this year was not a good year. They left their homeland and had no place to go. This cold winter would become unusually cruel. They might all die. Then there was only the second choice. Around Changji town, an empty space was quickly cut down. When the monstrous flame reached here, it might pass through the town. But this would mean a terrible workload, surrounding the town, with a radius of dozens of meters, cutting down hundreds and thousands of trees that were about to mature. This was an unprecedented harsh challenge. But for the sake of their homeland, to at least to have a place to temporarily survive the coming winter, the people of Changji town chose the latter. They wanted to challenge this natural disaster, caused by some terrible power that they could not understand. So on the first day, they began to cut down the small trees around the town. These small trees, including the small trees that could only be hugged by a person, were cut down, dragged into the town, used to strengthen houses, or made into various tools. The population of this town was not large, only about 100. However, among these hundreds of people, even the wealthiest Yu family who dominated the town's timber purchasing power, were experts in this kind of work. On the same day, the news of Li Yunxin tearing apart Chengkongzi and being heavily injured spread to the southwest and northwest, including the Qing, Yi, Yu, Chun, Ping, Qi, and Shi countries. The dozens of sects of Daotong and Kenzo all had sects in these countries, and spread the news even more widely. However, the whereabouts of Li Yunxin was still a mystery. They had sent out disciples, but no one had seen the demon. This seemed to be a matter of common sense. The territories of these countries were so vast, but the number of cultivators was pitifully small compared to the number of cultivators. Even though there were garrisons in all the major cities, they could only cast a general net, and that net was too big. By the next day, the small trees around Changji town had all been cut down, and people began to deal with the bigger, thicker trees. The entire town was mobilized. The young and strong laborers worked day and night, while the old, weak, women, and children were responsible for food and sundries. The town had never been so united and busy before, but the fear that accompanied the busyness also lingered. But there were always strange people in the town. A young man and two even younger women. The three of them came to Changji a few days ago and stayed with the Yu family. It was said that they were also surnamed Yu. However, the man's surname was Yu, and the two women didn't have surnames, only given names. One was called Wuxia, and the other was Li. The three of them became the only idlers in the town. But in fact, the man was the most idle, and the two women were still busier. For example, the man surnamed Yu, named Yu Meng, moved a chair at noon and sat in front of the Yu family's door, watching the people of the town bustle back and forth. On the road paved with bluestone slabs, the men were shouting and carrying logs with faces full of impatience as they walked towards the lumber yard in the north of the town. Their clothes were torn by grass and wood, and their faces were covered with dust, mud, and sweat. Their hair was disheveled, and there were even blisters at the corners of their mouths. But inside the bluestone brick gate of the Yu family's town, Yu Meng sat steadily on a rattan chair. He held a pot of tea in his right hand and played with a small black sword in his left. Two girls, one massaged his legs, and the other peeled peanuts and put them in his mouth. They looked disgustingly leisurely. There weren't many girls in this small town that mainly relied on manual labor. Even if there were, they had long lost their original delicate and cute looks because of the hardships of the years. The 13 or 14-year-old girls had dark skin and stout bodies, like the rough women in the city of Wei. Therefore, Wuxia and Li made the eyes of the people in the town light up. They were beautiful and had snow-white skin. Although their small hands weren't soft and boneless, they weren't as rough and calloused as those big hands. Most importantly, they had a different temperament that the people in the town had never seen before. They were dignified, elegant, and naturally had an indescribable sense of nobility when dealing with people. But they didn't have the snobbish attitude of the rich families in the nearby counties. On one hand, they made people feel that they couldn't be played with and difficult to get close to, but on the other hand, they made people feel extremely kind. At least that was what Xiaoping thought. Sun Xiaoping was carrying a log as thick as a bowl and walking towards the north of the town. He was sandwiched between two people and could only see the inside of the Yu family's house through the gaps between the logs. But at least he could see it openly. If he walked outside, he would probably be like the other teenagers, looking straight ahead, and only glancing at them when they were wiping their sweat or coughing too frequently. But even this time was too short. They quickly walked past the Yu family's house. Sun Xiaoping walked a few more steps and felt his shoulders getting hot and itchy from the rough bark. So he suddenly spat on the ground. That Yu Meng is a lazy glutton. He doesn't even move his own hands, and only orders people around. Those two girls have a hard life. Talking about these things at this time, no one should have paid attention to him. Unexpectedly, he received a warm and widespread response. The originally heavy and anxious atmosphere relaxed a little, as if the topic about the two girls had temporarily relieved these men. Then they started to talk about it. But they weren't helping. Some people who had been to the manors and prefectures laughed, saying that Yu Meng looked like the son of a rich family. This was not the kind of rich family in the county, but at least a rich young master in the prefectures. The maids of such a rich person probably ate and dressed much better than the master you in the town. In the future, when the young master married his wife, these two maids who had served him since they were young would probably become his concubines. From then on, as long as the family didn't decline, they would live a luxurious life. If this was called a hard life, then what were they called poor lives? Xiaoping understood in his heart, but he was not convinced, and grumbled a few more words. So the married man laughed. First of all, for the maids of such a rich family, those things were their duty. If young master Yu did it himself, they would be so panicked that they would cry. Two weak girls, one could tell from their hands that they were spoiled. If young master Yu didn't need them to do anything, what would they do? Would they be chased out? After saying this, he teased Xiaoping, asking if he had feelings for the two maids. The one called Wuxia looked like the older sister, with a pair of almond-shaped eyes. She looked very dignified, and probably did things in a steady manner. The one called Lily looked like the younger sister, with a pair of almond-shaped eyes, and when she didn't smile, she had a bit of charm. It's just that these two beauties probably don't like you, Xiaoping, so don't even think about it. After they finished talking, a burst of good-natured laughter suddenly burst out. This laughter passed through the streets and alleys, and seemed to lighten the dark clouds in the distant sky. But after a while, the laughter suddenly stopped, and everyone became silent. Because it was snowing. White powder floated down from the sky, as if the winter snow had arrived early. People knew that this meant the fire was getting closer and closer. If they didn't manage to escape this calamity, then those two lovely girls would also be buried. That fire didn't discriminate between life and death. Its ashes. Yu Meng put the small sword on his leg, raised his hand to catch the ashes, and looked at it. There are only 3 or 4 days left. His tone and expression now were completely different from the silly young master Yu in the city of Wei. Even because of these days of running around, his skin was darker and his figure thinner. It made his eyes look even bigger. Wuxia stopped and raised her hand. Do we really have to stay here? I went to see the fire a few days ago. Young master, it didn't look like an ordinary fire. It seemed to be made by a Taoist. Could it be that they are looking for you? Yu Meng laughed. They don't need to make such a big fuss to find me. It's more like dealing with Li Yunxin. But there's no news from him recently. People don't dare to go to Dongting anymore. After a while, Lily suddenly said, These people are really stupid. Why do they want to cut down all the trees? I heard third uncle said that at this time, a fire from the inside would be enough. Yu Meng laughed again. It depends on the time. They will definitely use this method, but not now. They have to cut down all the big and small trees and carry them away, and then set fire to the bushes. Otherwise, the woods are so dense. It will be bad if the fire doesn't burn out, and the fire from the other side comes again. Besides, once the fire is over, there will be nothing left. As for food, we can barely eat the food we have. But what do we use to keep warm in winter? It's so cold that the roots of the trees under the ground are all frozen. If the snow collapses the house, or we have to sell some wood in the spring next year. So, they are not only trying to prevent fire. This Master Yu is doing a good job. If in the past he could be one of our. He had unintentionally said this and stopped, not saying anything more. After a while, he closed his eyes and leaned back on the cane chair, sighing softly. Let's wait for Mr. Liu. Wuxia and Lily didn't say anything. They just went to do their work in silence and heartache. They have been here for half a month. Her young master didn't say why he came here. He only said he was waiting for someone, his former teacher, one of the most famous masters in the martial arts world, water-repelling sword Lu Gongjiao. So the next day passed, but the Taoist priests of various schools in various countries still didn't find any trace of Li Yunxin. At this time, the mortals in the secular world discovered the terrible fire. The competent provincial government began to organize the villagers to put out the fire, but soon realized that the fire was not ordinary fire. During the fight between Li Yunxin and Chen Kongzi, one released the ninth heaven thunder fire, and the other released the ninth heaven godly thunder. How could mortals put out the fire caused by these two forces that didn't belong to the secular world? So the disaster couldn't be hidden anymore. It was reported to the higher authorities and reached the higher authorities. At this level, the Taoist priests stationed in the major cities had to be alerted. The wilderness forest almost supported half of the surrounding population. Even the stupidest of officials knew that if this dense forest was burned down, the consequences would be terrible. So the Taoist priests began to cast spells to try to put out the fire. But soon they realized it wasn't as easy as they thought. The fire was ignited by a true state-long sun and a true state Taoist priest who specialized in thunder and fire. They fought with all their strength and risked their lives. How could the disciples in the conception and emptiness realms easily put out such a fire? So 3 days later, after the disciples who were sent out to try to find Li Yunxin's traces had tried, the Taoist priests of higher levels had no choice but to participate in this fire-extinguishing operation. As a result, the shortage of manpower increased, and Li Yunxin's whereabouts became even more mysterious. So on the 5th day, on the 5th night, the sky of Changji town was still not dark. Instead, it turned into a terrifying and heart-palpitating blood red. The waves of fire could already be seen. The waves of fire covered the sky and the sun, like a 100-meter-high wall. The waves of fire not only brought high temperature, but also strong wind. The strong airflow rolled up to the sky, and the streets and houses of Changji town could hear the howling of ghosts. The terrifying hot wind blew everything away. Even the surface of the Tulan River was covered with white mist, as if the whole town was sucked into another space. A day ago, they set fire to the bushes outside the town. Now there was a 10-meter-wide isolation zone between the town and the wilderness forest. People gathered on the streets and breathed in the hot and suffocating air. They held all kinds of containers filled with water in their hands and waited in fear for the judgment of the fire. At around 7 p.m., 19 p.m. to 21 p.m., the forest outside the isolation zone was finally ignited. The waves of fire rose outside the town. At this time, even if people looked up, they couldn't see the top of the waves of fire. It seemed as if it was burning all the way to the sky and would collapse in the next moment. The town was surrounded by the flaming mountain, and it faced the Tulan River, which was even more foggy. When the trees were burning, the crackling sound was even louder than the firecrackers during the New Year. But the whistling sound of the airflow was even louder than the crackling sound. The young children were frightened and cried, but their cries were very weak in such a sound, just an inconspicuous interlude. The burning lasted for half an hour. The water in the buckets and basins of the people in the town began to warm up. But the people's efforts in the past 5 days seemed to have paid off. The fire did not cross the isolation zone. The scorched earth they burned had undug tree roots, which began to smoke because of the extreme heat. So in the land outside the town, there seemed to be hundreds of smokers' underground smoking pots. Fortunately, it was only emitting green smoke. After an hour, it did not catch on fire. This scene was strange and terrible, but people slowly relaxed. They felt that this disaster was probably going to be over. So another 2 hours passed. No one dared to close their eyes and sleep. They were all vigilant. Most of the houses in the town were made of wood. If there was a fire, all their efforts would be in vain. People began to talk in low voices while watching the night. It seemed that if they spoke too loudly, the evil spirits hidden in the fire would be alarmed, and misfortune would come. They drank water, ate food, and vigilantly watched everything around them, watching the terrible fire not far away. But on the whole, their tense emotions were slowly relaxing. The next thing to think about was how to survive this cold winter, how to find a way out in the coming spring. Maybe they could switch to farming. After the fire of the wild forest, the land would be very fertile. Maybe they could hire a few farmers from the nearby state capital, and they could switch from forest farming to farming. But they did not know who owned the wild forest. They had lived in the forest for so many years, but except for the government's taxes, no one claimed ownership. But they heard from the old people in the town that the forest in Changji town, including the even wider forest, was indeed someone's private property. Just like that, another 4 hours passed. People began to feel tired, and some people were drowsy. But at this time someone frowned. Sun Xiaoping and a few young people were guarding outside the town. At first, they stood with water, gritted their teeth, and endured the scorching heat, ready to put out the fire at any time. After 6 hours, they also felt tired, so they put down the water buckets and sat down. They ate the dry food they brought, and occasionally chatted to pass the time. Sun Xiaoping was concerned about the fire, and he was also concerned about the girls in the Yu family's residence in town. He didn't know why he couldn't eat or sleep these days. There was always an inexplicable restlessness in his heart, but he really didn't know how to get rid of it. Therefore, that night, he stared at a tree dozens of meters away, right next to the isolation zone, in a daze. He was lost in thought. For example, when was that girl going to leave? His third uncle said that young master Yu would take them as concubines. But what about now? At night, he felt that he was much better than young master Yu. He didn't know how to order people around. If he married Miss Wuxia or Miss Lily, he wouldn't even let them touch the spring water. He used to study in the county school for 3 years, so he was literate, so it wouldn't be a disgrace to them. At that time, his family was still well off. He stared at the tree and thought about all kinds of things. Then he suddenly straightened up, frowned, and let out a soft sound of surprise. No one heard his sigh. But then Sun Xiaoping stood up and walked a few steps forward. He craned his neck to look at the tree he stared at for a long time. Something wasn't right. Chapter 343. It was a camphor tree. Its trunk was as thick as a person's arms, and it was more than 10 meters tall. Dozens of meters away, and in the midst of the flames, Sun Xiaoping could only vaguely see its slightly thicker branches. But even so, when he was in a daze, he still counted the branches of the tree over and over again. There were 9 thick branches. On top of the 9 thick branches, there were 23 thinner branches. These branches had leaves on top. Some leaves were like steamed buns, some like gourds. There were also some like Miss Wuxia's face and waist. This big camphor tree had been burning for 6 hours, almost a whole night. Sun Xiaoping knew wood and knew that camphor trees were oily, so they burned faster. But the problem was, his companions noticed his actions. They were stunned for a moment, then stood up nervously, thinking that he had discovered the fire. Xiaoping, what's wrong? Sun Xiaoping frowned and thought for a while. Without turning his head, he pointed at the camphor tree. Look at that camphor tree. His companions immediately looked there, but they only saw the tree in the fire. The trunk and branches were already black. There was nothing unusual. So they asked him again, what's wrong with the camphor tree? Sun Xiaoping was silent for a while. Then his voice trembled. 6 hours ago, I saw, it had 9 big branches, 23 small branches, and those leaves. Now take a look. A few of his companions heard his words and looked at the tree again, still confused. But there were already 2 smart people. After looking at the camphor tree again, their eyes widened. Sun Xiaoping took a deep breath. Although the air was so hot that it was hard to breathe, his voice was cold. It's been burning for 6 hours. The leaves are still there. This fire. How long will it burn? Everyone was stunned. The outside seemed to be in chaos. Even in the backyard of the Yu family, Wuxia and Lily could still hear the sorrowful, frightened and fearful voices of the people of Changji town. The voices even covered the sound of the wind, so they could slightly hear what the group of people were saying. Some people came to the Yu family's mansion to question Yu Zhengfang. Yu Zhengfang was the master of Changji town's Yu clan, a gentry. He was in charge of the town's timber trade and the monetary regulations. Although this town also had a captain, Yu Zhengfang was the one who had the final say. He was the one overseeing and coordinating the defense of Changji town. However, he didn't expect things to turn out this way. It's been 6 hours. The leaves haven't even burned out, young master. Lily came back from the front after asking around. She didn't seem to know what to say. She stood at the door and held onto the door frame, watching Wuxia undressing Yu Meng and untying his hair. Young master, isn't this a barbecue? If this fire kept burning for a few days, a dozen days, and the temperature kept getting higher and higher, the people in the town would become roasted meat on a stone slab. They would be cooked slowly. There's no way to escape. Wuxia untied Yu Meng's hair and combed it with a wooden comb. After Lily finished speaking in one breath, she turned her head and asked, "What about following the river? Isn't there a boat?" "I also went to the river just now." Lily closed the door and walked to the table, picking up the teapot. The air was getting drier and drier. It was autumn now, but it was as hot as the dog days. "I don't know what's so strange. The river wasn't on fire, but it's hotter than the town. Guess what? The fish floated up. It's cooked. How can we take a boat like this? Their small dinghy isn't like our family's ship. If we take them to the river, they'll be cooked within a few feet." After saying this, she poured some tea from the teapot to drink. She frowned after taking a sip. A few days ago, the tea was too cold at this time. But now the tea was actually warm, as if it had just been boiled. She drank a cup of tea, but the heat was not enough, so she unbuttoned 2 buttons of her clothes and sat down. Wuxia saw her like this, looked at her, and then looked at Yu Meng. Yu Meng smiled. "It won't be cooked. If this kind of fire and temperature were to continue burning, there would be 3 things that would happen first. First, someone accidentally set the house on fire, or the house itself is roasted. So the town is in a sea of fire. As for the other one, it's to burn out fire poison. You've all heard of it. Someone lit a fire to keep warm in the house in the winter, and the fire poison came out, killing everyone in the house. Although Changji town is big, the fire is even bigger. Being surrounded by the fire for a few days, the poison is also very scary." When he said this, he stretched out his arms. So Wuxia helped him change into his pajamas and helped him lie down. Lily was anxious. "Young master, what's the third thing?" Yu Meng lay down, closed his eyes and thought for a while. "The third thing? I guess it's already happened. Do you know who lived near Changji town, in this Hulu mansion, who used to live there?" Wuxia picked up the fan, used a small handkerchief to wipe the sweat on his forehead, and then gently fanned Yu Meng. "How would we know? The who wrote in Hulu mansion should have been pronounced as Hu Er Hunluan. This is a translation of the vernacular, taking the meaning of Hu people. The same path. It's both a transliteration and a free translation. But Hu Er Hunluan originally referred to a group of nomads who lived in this generation, meaning people of the forest and black stone. And this Tulan of Tulan River is also Hu Er Hunluan people. Turan meant black stone. Tulan River is actually Blackstone River. Yu Meng sighed in a low voice. Guess why this river is called Blackstone River, and why the water is so hot. Wuxia's hand that was fanning Yu Meng paused for a moment, and then looked at Lily. These 2 girls had been calm before this. But now, there was a hint of fear in their eyes as well. They knew what the black stone was. In the past, when it was autumn and winter, the Yu family transported black stone by cart. The Yu family's big house had an earth dragon coiled under it. Ordinary people use firewood to warm the earth dragon, but the Yu family used black stone. That thing was dug out from the ground. A fingernail-sized piece was equivalent to a good piece of dry firewood. That thing didn't have any smell, and it felt very smooth, like colored glass or jade. It was hard to ignite when it encountered an open flame, so it had to be smothered with firewood for half a day before it could be ignited. But once it was ignited, a fingernail-sized piece of black stone could burn for a whole day. And now, this Tulan River was the meaning of Blackstone River. Lily suddenly jumped up, as if there was something scary under the ground. Her little face was pale, and she pointed at the ground. "Young master, you mean under the river? Under the ground, it's all black stone. Like gold, silver, and copper mines, it's all black stone mines. Young master, how do you know?" Yu Meng opened half of his eyes and looked at her. "Don't be afraid. It's different from our house. It's true that there's black stone underground, but it's buried deep. It'll be fine after a few days. It's just that the fire on the ground is burning fiercely. Maybe it'll burn all the way to the bottom. If the whole piece of black stone is ignited and smothered under the ground, probably even the Deva can't put it out." He seemed to be slowly getting sleepy, and closed his eyes and yawned. Looking at the Tulan River, the black stone underground has already been ignited. "You 2 really can't calm down. Take my talisman, and see tomorrow." He yawned as he spoke, But before he could finish, he fell asleep. Wuxia and Lily stared blankly for a while. Then, like two frightened but agile rabbits, they silently pounced towards the bedside and retrieved Yu Meng's undergarments. They felt around the clothes and found a white silk bag that was sewn on with familiarity. Then they pulled down the white silk bag and opened it. Inside was a purple talisman written with gold powder. Only then did the two girls feel slightly relieved. Wuxia and Lily kept the talismans properly before quietly extinguishing the lights and closing the door behind them. Hot wind blew over, along with the cries of the people in the front yard. It seemed that Yu Zhengfang didn't manage to appease them, and now they were making more and more noise. Indeed, they realized that the fire could burn for a few days, more than 10 days, or even a month, and so many people were trapped here, waiting for death. How could they not be anxious? If they knew this, they would have abandoned their homes and fled, and at least they could live a few more days, and not be roasted to death, suffocated to death, thirsty to death, and burned to death. It was also because of the choice they made in the past that they couldn't afford to regret, that the sadness and fear exploded even more violently. But panic and sadness were what they felt. Wuxia and Lily hugged the purple talisman in their arms, but their minds were much more at ease. This was a talisman that old master left for young master when he was alive. It was said that it was written by a Jimren in Daotong. It could save lives at a critical moment. That day when the Yu family was exterminated, they didn't even use it, so it was obvious how precious it was. Young master also mentioned this talisman. He said that once it was used, it would not be burned by fire or splashed by water. It could even move freely in thunder and fire. But it couldn't save everyone in the town. It could only protect the three of them. But young master has changed into a different person. Why did he insist on coming to Changji town? Why didn't he leave? And he didn't say. Wuxia exhaled softly, took out her little sword from her clothes, and held it in her arms. They had experienced the Yu family's extermination, and knew that many people would do many terrible things when the end of the world came. Their young master also changed. He used to be silly, but they all knew that young master wasn't really silly. Later, when the Yu family was exterminated, young master didn't pretend to be silly anymore. He took them to the north. They went to Changji town and stayed there, saying that they would wait for his master Lu Gongjiao, and that they had an appointment many years ago. They didn't know what they were waiting for. Their young master became smarter every day, and he knew more and more things. In their eyes, this was like a miracle performed by an immortal. They should have been happy, but they always felt that young master was becoming more and more unfamiliar. As if one day, he would suddenly leave. Lily also sighed with her sister. Young master, who is he? Halfway through her words, she suddenly let out a low and stern shout. She abruptly turned her head to look at the top of the wall. There was a figure on top of the wall, with only half of his head sticking out. He seemed to be frightened by her shout, and hurriedly shrunk back. Wuxia and Lily immediately stood up. Wuxia guarded the door, while Lily held the unsheathed small sword in her hand, and slowly walked down the wall. This wall wasn't the wall of the Yu family in the city of Wei. Along the way, they saw that the walls of many small towns weren't as thick and tall as the Yu family's courtyard wall. Therefore, that person seemed to climb up easily. He took a breath and poked his head out again. It turned out to be a teenager. Lily paused for a moment when she saw him, because he looked a little familiar, as if he was a kid in the town. Although this teenager was about the same age as her. In her eyes, he was really just like a kid. Big sister, it's bad outside. The teenager leaned on the wall for a long time, his face red to the ears, before saying this. Then he raised his hand to wipe his face. It's going to burn. The fire is bad. Do you guys want to escape with me? Lily was stunned, and turned to look at Wuxia. The two little sisters looked at each other for a while, and Lily suddenly laughed softly. Sun Xiaoping, who was on top of the wall, saw her laugh for a moment. He felt that the whole world suddenly cooled down. The sound of fire, wind, and people were all gone. Then he saw Lily holding a cute sheathed sword in her hand, as she leisurely and elegantly paced back and forth. Her lake green skirt rippled, revealing a pair of moon-white embroidered shoes. Then she turned around, tilted her head and looked at him. Why do you want to save us? How can we escape? Sun Xiaoping felt that his heart was hit by something warm, hot, and soft. He was stunned for a full 3 breaths time. That terrible and sweet throbbing gradually subsided, and he became flustered again. He didn't even dare to look directly into Lily's bright and beautiful eyes. He could only avert his gaze and look at her skirt. I'm not. Your girls and your maids. You must have suffered a lot. There's a boat by the river. You can escape on it. Lily giggled. Then what about my young master? Sun Xiaoping suddenly raised his head and wanted to say, who cares about your domineering, pretty boy young master? But the words were at the tip of his tongue, and he hurriedly swallowed them. After a slight hesitation he said, your young master should also take him away. Lily laughed again. She giggled like a silver bell as she turned around and walked to the front of the house. All right, little brother. We won't escape. You better pray for your own good luck. Sun Xiaoping's heart suddenly sank to the bottom of his stomach. It sank so much that his chest hurt, as if breathing would hurt. He looked at Lily's back in disappointment and finally shouted again. People will really die. But Lily no longer cared about him. She once again sat on the stone steps by the door, hugging the small sword and leaning against her sister. Sun Xiaoping clenched his teeth and suddenly wanted to jump into the courtyard. But at this moment he suddenly heard a high-pitched sharp cry. That was a woman's voice, piercing the night sky, the sound of the wind, and the sound of the fire, striking the tip of Sun Xiaoping's heart. He was slightly stunned for a moment before he realized what the cry was about. It's on fire. The first house in Changji town burned. But it wasn't the house near the fire that people were worried about, but a wooden house in the middle of town. Before this, the desperate people gathered at the Yu family's house to vent their emotions. Plus, the sky was bright red, and there was hot wind whistling between the houses on the street, so they didn't notice that the ground was smoking. Green smoke came out of the cracks in the stone road, and was soon dispersed by the wind. At this moment, a house that was already extremely dry from the wind finally caught fire. Yu Ming's prediction came true. The earth fire was ignited by the mountain fire. It was followed by the neighboring second and third houses. Once their terrifying worries became reality, the crazy and desperate people actually calmed down. If they ignored it, they would die soon. If they went to put out the fire, perhaps they could live a little longer. So they quickly swarmed out of the Yu family's house, as if they were grasping for a chance of survival, and went to put out the 3 burning houses. But the misfortune didn't stop there. Before the fire in the 3 wooden houses was brought under control, another 2 large houses on the west side of town caught fire. Outside the town, there was a sea of fire. At this moment, the town was also about to become a sea of fire. Wu Su and Lily saw the fire in the town, and immediately stood up to go into the house and wake Yu Ming up. They helped him get dressed, walked out of the house, and flew to the top of the Yu family's wall to take a look. This Changji town was already half in flames. The light of the fire illuminated their faces with a red glow. So from afar, they saw someone running towards the Tulan River, head first into it, wanting to swim away. But then there was a terrible scream. The river water hidden in the white fog was already boiling, and in an instant, people would be blinded, dizzy, and then scalded to death. Seeing such a scene, more than 10 people who were planning to board a boat and go along the river stopped in their tracks and started wailing like stray dogs. Lily looked carefully, but she didn't see the youth. Someone else was still putting out the fire. But it wasn't because they wanted to survive, but because they didn't know what to do in the face of death. So this was the only thing they could do. The fire spread quickly, and some people were engulfed in flames, while others ran around on the streets with their bodies on fire. 8 hours ago, this Changji town seemed to be working together to tide over the crisis. But now, it was actually like a fiery hell. Finally, the surviving 50 to 60 people crowded to the Yu family's wall. They seemed to see the 3 people standing on the wall, and for some reason, they ran over. But there was nothing they could do. The fire on both sides burned more and more fiercely. These people shrank under the wall in despair and burst into earth-shattering cries. Wuxia and Lily looked at the people under the wall, and hearing the cries, they couldn't bear to look away. Lily saw that the youth was among them. He also seemed to want to cry, but he raised his head and stared at Lily, his cheeks tightly clenched, and his hand tightly grasped an empty wooden bucket. Yumeng sighed. Use that talisman. The three of them could only watch as the dozens of people on the wall were burned alive, and there was nothing they could do. So Wuxia put her hand into her bosom, and she felt the purple talisman. But at this moment, they, as well as the people who were crying under the wall, suddenly heard the clanking sound of iron chains hitting each other. Cries, wind, fire, and the sound of houses collapsing. Among these loud sounds, the iron chains hitting each other sound shouldn't have been heard. But strangely at this moment, that weak but clear sound actually made its way into everyone's ears. It sounded as if there was a pair of invisible hands forcefully choking everyone's throat. The dying Changji town residents all stopped crying and stared at the bluestone road in the distance that was already engulfed in flames. Then they saw something even more terrifying than death. That was the Een soldiers are borrowing the road. An old man whose hair and beard were already charred said with great fear, as if he was moaning. In the face of death, the fear of being burned to death by the flames, they were in despair, howling and venting. But at this moment, in the face of another thing, another terrifying power that they absolutely could not understand, which brought about a great fear, even their wailing and despairing thoughts were frozen. There were terrifying ghosts, walking along the bluestone road that had already been burned red, coming out from the raging flames. There were terrifying heads. There were all kinds of heads. Human heads, dog heads, tiger heads, deer heads, bear heads. These were the heads of wild beasts that the residents of Changji town had either seen or never seen. Floated in the air, staring blankly at them with their lifeless eyes, maintaining the hideous and terrifying appearance they had before their deaths as they walked over. These were ghosts. Their heads still looked the same, but their bodies were so faint that they could not be seen clearly. Long, misty green iron chains locked their necks, stringing them together. Their steps were also synchronized. In this kind of night, it was a kind of terrifying uniformity that sent chills down one's spine. With every step he took, the iron chains clanked. With every clank of the iron chains, the flames that they passed through suddenly dimmed, turning into green willow, the wisps. Wherever they passed, sound and light were all absorbed. On the road were the corpses of the townspeople who had just been burned to death. As the procession of ghosts passed by, the hideous and terrifying ghosts of the townspeople stood up straight. Then, they were locked by the protruding iron chains and pulled into the procession. The feeling of suffocation brought about by fear gripped everyone, including Wuxia and Lily. They widened their eyes, held their breaths, and subconsciously wanted to hide behind Yumeng's back. However, as soon as they had this thought, they realized that they did not even have the strength to move their feet. Then, these people who were facing death saw a man in white walking out of the flames. In his hand was the iron chains that locked hundreds and thousands of dead souls. He was like a shepherd strolling in the red or green wilderness, walking slowly without any expression of pity, harvesting all the dead souls along the way. Seeing him, the old man in the crowd widened his eyes again. Using his throat that was choked by despair and fear, he squeezed out a few hoarse words. It's Yanjun. Master. We are already dead. However, after this sentence, the man in white stopped in his tracks. So the terrifying ghosts also stopped in their tracks. The people of Changji town saw Yanjun's face clearly. They never thought that Yanjun would look like this. But that Yama King, the originally expressionless Yama King, after glancing at the top of the wall on their side, suddenly smiled. Yama King? I'm not Yama King. I am Wei River Dragon King. ****. Note 1. Earth Dragon. An ancient way to keep warm. Leave a fire underground, and the fire has an opening on the ground. Start a fire outside, and the heat will enter the house through the fire. This is called Earth Dragon. The principle is the same as Fire Kong. Chapter 344. After saying that, he paused. Young master, why are you here? Exhaustion, heat, fear, and shock had caused those who were still alive to lose their ability to think. So when Li Yunxin looked at the top of the wall, they also looked at the top of the wall. They didn't know what Wei River Dragon King meant, but at least they knew that this white-clothed, terrifyingly handsome man was either an immortal who saved people from suffering, or a monster who killed people. And now, someone among them had a relationship with this man. A young master who lived in the town for more than 10 days. They didn't know much about him. But how could such a young master, who didn't even bother to pour himself water, be related to this devil? Under the desperate and frightened gazes of so many people, Yu Meng was stunned. He stared at Li Yunxin carefully for a while and opened his mouth. Li Yunxin? Li Yunxin slightly tilted his head to show his affirmation. Yu Meng frowned and didn't know what to say. Of course, he had seen Li Yunxin before. He was saved by the demon general under Li Yunxin's command, brought to the Lord Dongting Mountain, saw the magnificent palace on the mountain, and saw all kinds of immortal tricks. But at that time, he was carrying a blood feud, so he didn't have time to care about other things. All kinds of wonderful tricks were like smoke to him, and it was hard for them to enter his heart. And at that time, Li Yunxin had just entered the true state. Yu Meng didn't know how he killed Yunzi, nor did he know what he did in the Pitfall Mountain and Rong City. To this young master of the Yu family who was in dire straits, he knew that Li Yunxin was a cultivator and a fiendish demon. But as a cultivator and a demon, what kind of abilities did he have? These things were indeed unimaginable to ordinary people. But tonight, he saw Li Yunxin walk out of the despairing fire, and he saw Li Yunxin enslave and lead the souls of the dead. These two scenes alone, two scenes connected with the great terror of life and death, finally shook him to the core. He blinked his eyes several times before taking a deep breath. I'm here to take care of something. When he left Dongting, he said that he had to think about whether to follow the Wei River Dragon King or not. Now that he met Li Yunxin again in such a situation, Yu Meng was not sure what he would do. He felt that this terrible flame might have been caused by Li Yunxin. This guy had always been crazy, but if he could create such a terrible fire and burn so many creatures, such a cruel person, he couldn't imagine what such a cruel person would do. It seemed that he could no longer be judged by common sense. Li Yunxin listened to his words, nodded slightly, and pondered for a while. While he was deep in thought, the flames finally enveloped the entire Changji town, except for the area around him. When the fire came near him, it suddenly weakened. It first turned light yellow, then turned dark green. Then it turned from blazing hot to gloomy cold. Because of this, these survivors were able to rely on the wall, and were protected by Li Yunxin's careless protection. After 6 breaths, Li Yunxin looked at Yu Meng again. So have you done it? Not yet. How long will it take? His tone sounded like they met on the side of the road tonight. The sky was clear, so they chatted for a while. This made Yu Meng very nervous. A few days at least, dozens of days at most. I'm not sure yet. Yu Meng tried to calm down. This fire. Did you make it? Li Yunxin shook his head. Do it as soon as possible. Do it quickly, so that you can help me. Then he smiled again. This fire? It has something to do with me. But it also has something to do with the Daotong Kenzo. Speaking of the Daotong Kenzo, have any of you seen their people nearby recently? The second half of the question was directed at the townspeople, who were huddled under the wall, but who dared to answer him. Moreover, they really did not know what he was talking about. But it seemed like he did not really want them to answer. Li Yunxin took 2 steps forward. The iron chain in his hand rattled. Those scary ghosts were also pulled closer by him. Then he bent down and looked at those people. No one dared to speak. Even the children did not dare to cry. The scary aura took away their courage and consciousness. They stared at him with wide eyes, teeth chattering. Li Yunxin stretched out his hand and used a finger to touch an old man's forehead, then retracted it. Then a faint smoke-like soul was pulled out by him. Then, Li Yunxin took out a blue book out of nowhere and opened it. It seemed that this book contained all the old man's memories. After a few glances, he frowned slightly. The iron chain in his hand shook. The old man's soul was locked in that scary group. The old man's body tilted and he fell. The townspeople stirred slightly and huddled closer to each other, like a group of frightened rabbits. Lily let out a soft ah. Li Yunxin stretched out his hand to touch the second person's forehead. But no one dared to resist. In the face of such a powerful and unfamiliar force that was beyond their understanding, all courage disappeared. They were like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. It wasn't until Li Yunxin touched the forehead of the sixth person, the youth named Sun Xiaoping, that Lily couldn't help but cry out. "What are you doing?" Her voice was very soft and sounded timid, but at this time, she was indeed the only one who had the courage to ask Li Yunxin this question. Li Yunxin glanced at her, but then stretched out his hand. "You want to kill all of them?" Lily shouted again. "What's the difference between you and those Taoists in the city of Wei?" Wuxia pulled Lily's sleeve, but at the same time, she held her little sword tightly and stared at Li Yunxin with vigilance. Li Yunxin turned to look at Yu Meng. Yu Meng hesitated for a while, but in the end, he did not scold Lily. He frowned. "It's not easy for them to survive. Why does Dragon King have to kill them all? They're just ordinary people." "Who is Dragon King trying to ask?" Li Yunxin straightened up and let go of the teenager in front of him. "Do you want to know what happened? Like this fire?" Yu Meng could not keep up with Li Yunxin's jumping thoughts. Or it could be said that the stronger party always had the power to do whatever they wanted. So he could only frown again and follow the other's train of thought. "What is it?" "Daotong and Kenzo are chasing after me. I almost succeeded. But now I am preparing to leave a way out for myself. As for this fire, I didn't make it. It was accidentally ignited when I was fighting with Daotong. I can't put it out until now." Li Yunxin looked around again. "I need to borrow this place later. I never thought there would be a town here. But it doesn't matter. So I need to know if there are any Daotong or Kenzo spies nearby. You three are acquaintances. Why don't I ask them instead of you?" Yu Meng did not answer him immediately. But Lily frowned again. "Why kill people?" Li Yunxin's face suddenly showed a strange and complicated expression. He stared straight at Yu Meng for a while, then suddenly said, "Young master, you really can't tell?" Yu Meng was even more puzzled. "Tell what?" Li Yunxin was silent for a while, then suddenly reached out and lifted the body of the old man who died in the beginning. His hand was on the old man's neck, so it was effortless for him to lift the old man up. Then, like shaking a sack, he shook the old man's body. There was a crashing sound. White bones and dust fell to the ground. Yu Meng, Wuxia and Lily were stunned. They stared at the pile of white bones for a long time, speechless. A body that was full of flesh and blood just a breath ago turned into bones in such a short time? And if they looked carefully, they would find that the white bones were not white, but yellow. There were even some cracks on the bones. The cracks were not caused by a punch, but more likely due to a long period of drying and cracking. Li Yunxin reached out and lifted a few other bodies. They all shook in the same way. They all turned into a pile of bones and fell to the ground. Then, Li Yunxin reached out and lifted Sun Xiaoping up. This young man was not dead yet, and now that he was on the brink of death, he somehow mustered some courage and tried to kick the scary demon in front of him. But Li Yunxin dipped his left index finger into his mouth, dipped it in some saliva, and touched the young man's forehead. And so, this young man, who was angry and hopeless and kicking nonstop, in the blink of an eye, became a pile of bones. The scary thing was that the bones were still moving. It stared with its empty eye sockets, and its teeth chattered, making a sound that sounded like a human's voice. Wuxia and Lily finally cried out again, and hid half their bodies behind their young master's back. Li Yunxin took out Sun Xiaoping's soul. The bones stopped moving and fell to the ground. Then, he slightly raised his head and looked at Yu Meng. "Do you know that you have been living in the same ghost town?" The three of them were stunned, and felt a chill crawling up their spines. It was as if the surroundings were not burning with fire, but ice and snow. "Looks like you don't know." Li Yunxin turned back and continued to take out the souls from the townspeople, looked at them, and moved on to the next one. But this time, he was minding his own business while talking. "On my way here, I met some people who lived in the wild forest. Some of them told me that the north was haunted. They said that those ghosts rushed into the wild forest to kill. Anyone who came near Changji town was killed. This ghost has been haunting for hundreds of years. This Changji town. There was indeed a Changji town. But that was during the Yi dynasty. At the end of the Yi dynasty, Changji town was destroyed by war, and no one lived in this area, so it started to be haunted. These ghost things. I looked at them and remembered. They were all people from Changji town. But after they died, their souls were extracted, kept, and sealed in their corpses to become puppets. They didn't even know they were dead, and slowly rotted and dried up. They continued to cut trees, kill people, eat and place logs. Anyone who came up from the river to watch was also killed. But luckily, there are not many people here. The person who sealed them here told them to guard something. He also told them to wait for a person. Ah, haha. Li Yunxin looked at the blue book in his hand and laughed. No wonder these ghost things didn't run when they saw the fire, and insisted on guarding this town. So I have to take a good look, and see if it's the work of Daotong or Kinzo people. Such a great ability, to be able to leave so many ghosts in the world of the living. It's really like a human. After saying this, he reached out his hand and crushed the neck of the last corpse. So the bones in front of him were already piled up to his knees. Found it. But recently, there was one called Lu Gongjiao. He came here half a month ago, but he was surrounded and killed by these ghost things. He turned to look at Yu Meng. Lu Gongjiao. Isn't this young master Yu's teacher? But it's reasonable. Martial arts masters were dealing with people, not dead ghosts. And there were so many dead ghosts at that. If young master Yu wants to wait here, then your teacher will have waited in vain. Yu Meng's eyes widened. Dead? My teacher is dead. But Li Yunxin didn't care about his surprise. He turned around and stood up straight, looking at Yu Meng seriously. This group of dead ghosts kill anyone they see. But the three of you came here safe and sound. In other people's eyes, these dead ghosts all look like dried up bones, but you can't see it. So young master Yu, who are you? Yu Meng was stunned. Wu Su and Lily also opened their small mouths, looking at their young master in surprise. After a while, Yu Meng opened his mouth. How would I know? I heard someone talking to me. Who? Li Yunxin immediately asked. I don't know, it's just in my head. Yu Meng frowned and hit his head. Because of this, he accidentally fell off the wall. Wu Su and Lily screamed and hurriedly jumped down to help him. But the two girls reacted a little slower because of their shock. Yu Meng tumbled and fell into the pile of bones in front of Li Yunxin, stirring up a cloud of smoke. The two girls frowned, gritted their teeth, and came over to help him up. That Yu Meng hit his head again unaware. It told me something. It seems like I remembered it myself. And told me to come to Changji town, to find me. Although he didn't look like he was in pain. He was thinking very hard. Li Yunxin looked at him carefully, and felt that he wasn't faking it. So he took a deep breath, and used his sword fingers to wipe his eyes. His black and white human eyes instantly turned into the golden eyes of dragons. Then he scanned the ground in all directions. When I came here, I felt that there was something wrong with the earth chi here. As he looked, he walked slowly. The iron chain in his hand rattled, and everywhere it went, the flames were quickly extinguished. So there's an array hidden underground. This array. Good heavens. But his sigh was like winking at a blind man. If Lu Laodao was here, he would know that Li Yunxin had always been good at setting up arrays. Not only was he good at it, but he also set up unimaginably large arrays. And this array actually made him sigh. Good heavens. What kind of amazing array was this? Chapter 345. Li Yunxin sighed. With a flip of his hand, he took out a pen and paper. But this paper was not an ordinary paper. It was a magic paper used to write talismans. It was only the size of a palm, but it could be extended to a very large area with divine sense. This item was either for the new disciples, or for the Almighty with extremely high cultivation. The new disciples couldn't control their own spiritual aura on the talisman paper, so they needed this thing. It was like a child learning to write big characters for the first time. So the junior disciples made the talismans bigger. But in this kind of magic paper that could be extended by divine sense, when the divine sense withdrew, it would still be the size of a palm, so it could be used. This thing, in Li Yunxin's eyes, was like a picture of his previous world. It was the same principle, enlarging it and writing on it, and then retracting it. When almighty beings with extremely high cultivation bases used this magic paper, they would need to construct an intricate and complicated formation. This kind of formation might be layered on top of each other. Every stroke, in turn, would contain one or two small formations. Without this magic paper, it was almost impossible to make it. But the cultivators in the middle were already skilled enough to make a Dao field in a snail's shell. But they didn't have a better skill to make an extremely complicated formation, so they couldn't use it. Now that Li Yunxin took out this thing that he plundered from Cheng Kongzi, it was naturally for a powerful cultivator to use, for the first time in his life. Compared to this kind of delicate and complicated formation, he seemed to be better at and preferred the bold and unconstrained formation, such as using mountains and rivers as a formation. But tonight, the thing under Changji town wasn't something he was very good at, so he decided to give it a try. When he spread the magic paper in the air and picked up the brush, Yu Meng held his head and asked, "What are you doing?" Li Yunxin picked up the brush. The pale golden magic paper in front of him suddenly became infinitely large in front of his eyes. It was almost able to cover the entire Changji town. But this feeling was only his own feeling. He turned to look at Yu Meng and saw that he was still an ordinary person. This kind of experience was hard for mortals to imagine. So he put down the first stroke. First, he used cinnabar to draw the first layer on the paper. There were many red dots on the magic paper, like red stars in the sky. Li Yunxin put down the brush so fast that his arm turned into a blur. In just 2 breaths of time, this palm-sized piece of magic paper was already filled with densely packed red dots. From Wuxia and Lily's point of view, this piece of paper was already red. But this was only the first layer. Li Yunxin was trying to simulate and restore the original structure of the huge formation under Changji town. Then he put down the brush and let out a long breath. The scorching airflow turned into an arrow-like white mist in the air. When I was in the city of Wei, I heard that when young Master Yu was born, there was a strange phenomenon. It was as if he had been possessed by a deity, and he helped your father take control of the unstable Yu family, ultimately becoming a superpower in the kingdom of Qing. I also heard that after young Master Yu grew up, he was struck by lightning one day. Then, he turned his head and started drawing the structure of the second layer of the formation. I also heard that after young Master Yu grew up a little, he was struck by lightning one day. Lily didn't even think, and stood in front of Yu Meng. I also heard that after young Master Yu grew up, he was struck by lightning one day. Lily didn't even think about it, and stood in front of Yu Meng. That's just a bunch of servants gossiping. Lily didn't even think and stood in front of Yu Meng. This is just the gossip of the servants. Li Yunxin was writing on the paper when the tip of his brush moved slightly. The little sister wanted to return to her young master's side in a panic, but she found that no matter how she sprinted, she was still walking in the same place. The 2 girls panicked and wanted to return to their young master's side, but found that no matter how fast they ran, they were still in the same place. Then Li Yunxin glanced at Yu Meng. The 2 girls are really loyal and cute. So young Master Yu, is this true or false? Yu Meng opened his mouth slightly and looked at the 2 sisters, then at Li Yunxin. It's true. Li Yunxin took a step back and narrowed his eyes. He stared at the magical paper in front of him. Then he looked at the ground. He seemed to be comparing notes. Then he walked forward again and used his brush to change a few points. However, in Yu Meng's eyes, he had only added a few more strokes on the paper that had already been dyed crimson by him. Tell me about it. Li Yunxin picked up his brush and began to draw the magical third layer. Yu Meng frowned and let out a long sigh. All right, that's enough. Okay, I know you are suspicious of me, but I am thinking too hard. I didn't do anything to harm you. If you want to know, I will tell you. I was conscious when I was born. I can recognize people, remember things, and can speak. It's like, The current me has suddenly been reincarnated into a child's body. Yu Meng looked at Li Yunqin. This is the truth. If you want to laugh, just laugh. But the truth. But Li Yunqin didn't laugh. He didn't look at him. He continued to stare at the magical paper, his hand continuously drawing. It was as if the miraculous experience that Yu Meng described, which made Wuxia and Lily's jaws drop, was just a common story that he had heard 1,000 times. He said, "Oh." Yu Meng was stunned. Then he heard Li Yunqin say, "Continue." He looked at the sea of fire around him, then at Wuxia and Lily. He sighed. Actually, there is another person. Or I don't know what it is. In my body or mind, he spoke to me at that time. I said it might be a person because he has a name. He told me that he was living in my body by accident. There will be a way. The rumors in the market. That I helped the Yu family through whatever storm, whatever wave. It's all because of him. Li Yunqin finally turned his head to look at him. Then his face revealed a faint, but very strange expression. Ha, young master Yu. What a good young master Yu. This is what a main character should be like. Yu Meng didn't know why, but he frowned. Li Yunqin turned his face back. He hesitated for a while, then started to write again. But it was much slower than the first time. Although the strokes were still like a storm, at least the arm was no longer an afterimage. When you were 10 years old, you ran to the roof to play at night, and got struck by lightning. What's going on? It was the old Shen in my head who told me to go to the roof. Yu Meng thought for a while and spoke more fluently. Oh, that old grandpa's surname is Shun. Li Yunqin said. Li Yunqin's performance influenced him. This Li Yunqin, he behaved calmly. He even said something that even he couldn't believe, but Li Yunqin was still calm. Yu Meng kept the secret in the past, because he was afraid of getting himself into trouble. But now that it had come to this, he suddenly realized, maybe Li Yunqin knew something, and he himself might be able to solve the mystery tonight. So he looked at Wuxia and Lily, who were too shocked to speak, and continued. I was 10 years old then. That night, old Shen suddenly asked me to go to the roof. He said an old friend came to visit. Old Shun was usually in the same body as me. So of course we had a good relationship. Plus, I heard it was an old friend. Although I was born with consciousness and knew how to recognize people, the truth is, I don't remember who I am. I asked old Shun. He said if I didn't drink Meng Po's soul-forgetting soup when I was reincarnated, then why can't I remember who I am in my past life? However, old Shin only said that I'm a person born with knowledge. That's why he reincarnated into my body by accident. When he said this, he saw Li Yunqin smile and shake his head. Yu Meng didn't know what Li Yunqin was smiling about, so he paused and continued. I asked him about his past, but he didn't say a word. He only said that night. I did as he said and climbed to the roof in the middle of the night. The sky was clear and the air was clear. But suddenly, a dark cloud floated over, and it started raining. Li Yunqin's pen stopped drawing on the magic paper. He turned to look at him. What kind of dark cloud? After saying this, he didn't answer randomly. He waved his left hand and dense water vapor rose from his sleeve. He pointed to the sky. Was it like this? Yu Meng followed his finger and looked at the sky. Actually, the sky was already bright at this time. But they were in the middle of a sea of fire. The thick smoke produced by the fire pressed heavily into the sky, blocking the sun completely as if it was night. But the dark clouds formed by the smoke were reflected red by the fire on the ground, like rolling lava or fire clouds in the sky. And under these fire clouds, Yu Meng saw a green dark cloud. It was lower than the smoke. He was stunned for a moment. Then he widened his eyes and looked at Li Yunqin. Yes. I remember it clearly. That night the cloud was very low. It seemed like it could be reached with one's hand, and it floated over suddenly. Then the old Shun in my head was talking to someone in the cloud. But it wasn't really talking. They didn't make a sound. I could only hear a few words in my head. I still remember. The person in the cloud said that old Shun was too ostentatious, and would be found by them. Old Shun said time is running out, and we should take a risk. I can roughly remember these two sentences. Yu Meng started to frown, because he felt that his head was starting to hurt again. The pain was so bad that it felt like it was going to split open. But he clenched his teeth. Then the two parties seemed to be annoyed. The person in the cloud struck down with a lightning bolt, and old Shen disappeared for a few years. Li Yunxin paused, the tip of his pen hovering over the paper. He frowned slightly and stared at the paper sideways. After thinking for a while, he looked at Yu Meng. A few years. Then he appeared again later. Was it when you went to save me? You, actually no. Yu Meng opened his eyes wide. Then he nodded and sighed. Yes. There was no news for a few years. Then he suddenly appeared one day. He told me to go out of the city to save someone. It was you. Ha! I knew it. Li Yunxin sneered, as expected. From the day I entered the city of Wei, I was set up. Good trick. Good courage. Good courage. What happened after that? Yu Meng frowned even more. That was the only time. Then it was a few days ago. The Yu family was destroyed. Old Shen once told me, if I had nowhere else to go, I should come to Changji town. When I was young, my teacher Lu Gongjiao once taught me martial arts, and accidentally found out that there was an old Shen in my head. But I don't even know when old Shen instructed my master to do something. A few days ago, he told me to come here and wait for my teacher. At this point, he seemed to have an unbearable headache. He just pounded his head with his fist and didn't say anything else. Li Yunxin was silent for a while. Then he turned around and continued to write on the magic paper. After another 15 minutes, he said, You want to figure it out, and so do I. Then this magic formation here. It might be able to remind you of something. But this thing. He took a deep breath and finished the last few strokes on the paper. By this time, he had been listening to Yu Meng for almost an hour. And he had also been drawing on this palm-sized magic paper for almost an hour. The densely packed red dots were superimposed on the surface of the paper. Ordinary people like Yu Meng who didn't practice Taoism could only see some blood-red dots. But for Taoists like Li Yunxin who practiced Taoism, once he immersed his divine sense into the paper, vast, magnificent, brilliant, and like a sea of stars, the scene immediately rushed towards him. A total of 64 layers of formations had been superimposed on this piece of magic paper. In the eyes of mortals, these densely packed red dots were stacked together. But in Li Yunxin's eyes, each layer of the formation was three-dimensional. Patches of red dots crisscrossed. At this time, it looked like the starry sky in the universe. And each red dot was a star in the starry sky. In fact, each red dot represented a black stone buried underground. Yu Meng said that there was a black stone mine under Changji town. But it wasn't completely true. In Li Yunxin's eyes and perception, there were black stones. But they weren't naturally formed. Someone had dug underground who knew how deep. Then, they filled in the black stones one by one. Each of them was as big as a house. They were also connected to each other by the same black stones, layer by layer, densely distributed in this Changji town, under the Tulan River in a huge space. If all the soil and stones in this space were cleared out, Li Yunxin raised his head and looked to the north. In the north, on the opposite side of Tulan River, there was a small mountain. But the fire was about to burn that small mountain. In fact, this magic formation had already started to operate slowly. The fire in the wilderness forest ignited the layer of black stones near the surface. Although it was only the first thin layer of the entire magic formation, the shocking heat produced by the smoldering black stones would be transmitted to the second layer. Then the third layer, the fourth layer, the fifth layer, and even the 64th layer. This magic formation was not driven by spiritual energy. Instead, it was driven by the heat produced by the burning black stones. Li Yunxin suddenly thought of something. He turned to look at Yu Meng. What's the name of that old Shen? Yu Meng thought for a while. He said his real name is Shen Mu. Chapter 346. Shen Mu. Li Yunxin frowned slightly and repeated the name. He did not seem to have any impression of it. Therefore, he refocused his attention on the composition of the formation on the magic paper in his hand. He could not understand what this formation was used for and how it worked. This formation did not seem to belong to Daotong, Kenzo, or the painting sect. It had a shocking simplicity. It only relied on countless repetitive dots to connect, and used pure heat to operate. In terms of state, the state of this thing was actually slightly higher than the Taoism of the three sects. However, because Li Yunqin did not understand what would happen once it was fully operated, he tried to draw this composition first, and then slowly find out the principle of operation. However, he searched for a quarter of an hour. In a quarter of an hour, Li Yunqin could learn an unfamiliar dharma of the true state, and he could understand the key to enter the true state from the transcendent state. But he still did not understand the meaning of this formation. Therefore, he hesitated for a moment. In fact, this formation could be used by him. He had been hiding in the wild forest for the past few days, running around with the help of the towering fire, to make a formation. However, compared to the precision and meticulousness of the Blackstone formation, his formation was rough and bold. And because it was rough and bold, it had a high tolerance for mistakes. There were many things that he could use. For example, this Blackstone formation, when it was operating, it would attract the chi of fire between heaven and earth. This place was next to the river. When the chi of fire and chi of water intersected, it would produce thunder. He could actually borrow this Blackstone array and use it as the key to his own array formation. This was the last place he needed to build. If he could borrow this formation, he could save 6 days of effort. 6 days. Right now, all the Taoist priests and swordsmen in the world were looking for him. How many incidents would happen in 6 days? However, he was not sure if this formation would go wrong in the future after he borrowed it. This was one of the rare times when Li Yunqin was uncertain. He thought about this for a long time. In the end, he sighed and turned to look at Yu Meng. If I'm not wrong, then Xin Mu called you here to activate the formation. Now, the array has started to operate, but I still haven't figured out what it looks like when it's fully activated. Based on the current speed, this formation will only be fully operational after 5 days. He frowned again. Looking at you now, you still look harmless. But I don't know what you'll remember in 5 days, and who you'll be. I don't have time to stay here for too long. So, what do you want to do now? Yu Meng hesitated for a while and said in a low voice, I want to remember. The blood feud of the Yu clan. His words were suddenly interrupted. A voice from the heavens interrupted him. Suddenly, a continuous buzzing sound came from the fiery clouds above their heads. It sounded like someone had pressed half an iron ruler on the table and flicked it. The sounds came one after another, and in the end, the clouds were shaken to the point that they started to tumble, and countless small clouds poked out. A loud shout came from the fiery clouds. Li Yunqin, you've cruelly harmed lives and committed a heinous sin. Where can you escape to now? As soon as the voice fell, another buzzing sound came from the fiery clouds. The fiery clouds in the sky rolled down. There were actually hundreds of cultivators riding on the clouds, surrounding Li Yunqin and the entire Changji town. The cultivators stood on top of the clouds, their faces indistinguishable. But the fiery clouds they were riding on were tumbling and surging endlessly. The imposing manner was extremely frightening. It was as if the Celestials had sent their celestial soldiers and generals. In the next moment, everything on the ground would be crushed into powder. Yu Meng, Wuxia and Lili had never seen such a scene before. They were stunned and looked up at the godlike cultivators in the sky. Then, they turned to look at Li Yunqin. They are. Li Yunqin took a deep breath and put away the magic paper and brush. He sneered, buzzing like flies. They're probably Kenzo people. After saying this, he threw his head back and laughed out loud. His laughter was not inferior to the voice from the cloud, and it caused the surrounding fire waves to scatter in all directions. You want to keep me here with just 100 people? Tell me who you are. How many heroes are there? How many heroes are there? He spoke in a heroic manner, but the iron chain in his hand trembled slightly. At Mount June, 100 people ambushed him. Now another 100 people. But now, these 100 people dared to show themselves. It seemed that their cultivation was much higher than before. Moreover, they were Kenzo. The swordsmen of the Kenzo were not as exquisite as the Taoists, but they were more powerful. He had to be an idiot to stand here and let them attack him. Thus, he already had a plan in his mind. Find the right opportunity to numb them. Then he made a feint, turned around and fled. As for this Yu Meng, he would stay here. This kind of person was born with a clear mind. He even had an old grandpa in his head. With this kind of main character template, his luck wouldn't be too bad. Moreover, there were two girls who liked to laugh beside him. The cultivators in the clouds didn't seem to be very angry after hearing Li Yunxin's arrogant words. It was the same loud and clear voice from before. Kinzo Lingshu Sword Sect, Chuliao Sword Sect, Lingguang Sword Sect, and Wuyan Sword Sect. We are here to kill the devil. Devil, can these people keep you here? Li Yunxin laughed loudly. I thought it was some high-class stuff. So it's you guys who are inferior. Lingshu Sword Sect, Sect Leader Ming Jinzi. I killed most of your disciples. You still dare to come here? Didn't you wet your pants in the sky a few days ago? As far as I know, there's also your Kinzo's Chongshao Grotto, near the Qing Kingdom and Yi Kingdom. That Chongshao Grotto didn't come to chase me, but sent you small fries. I remember. Li Yunxin acted as if he suddenly realized something. That Chongshao Grotto's minister Yu Liaozi, a few months ago, went to the Li Kingdom with a few smelly ox-nosed Taoists to chase after the ghost emperor. In the end, he betrayed his friends and survived. However, his cultivation has been completely destroyed. Now that he's lost his courage, he only dares to send you guys here? After he said this, he finally heard Ming Jinzi shout. Li Yunxin, you reckless demon. Even now, you still dare to speak arrogantly and insult our Kenzo Sendo. He indeed came, but he didn't intend to come. There was indeed a disciple sent by Kenzo, who accidentally discovered Li Yunxin's whereabouts. He didn't dare to act blindly without thinking, and hurriedly reported to his sect. Changji Town was located at the border between the Qing Kingdom and the Yi Kingdom. This place was actually the High Heaven Sword Sect's dojo. Since the three nearby Kenzo sects had gathered to capture Li Yunxin, as the host, the High Heaven Sword Sect naturally couldn't sit idly by. Moreover, Ming Jinzi really did hate him. Up in the sky, he was scared by this demon's gaze, and ran more than 400 li. How could he bear this kind of humiliation later on? At this moment, he was also on the cloud, standing shoulder to shoulder with another sect leader. After scolding Li Yunxin, he frowned and turned his face. Don't talk nonsense with him. Finish this quickly. This demon is sinister and cunning. Although he's surrounded by us now, I'm afraid. He's looking for an opportunity to escape. If we let him go this time, there will be endless trouble in the future. The person beside him was the sect leader of the Five-Sword Sect, Jing Guangzi. This sect leader looked to be a middle-aged female cultivator with a dignified appearance. The mountain dojo was in the northwest of the Yi Kingdom, facing the Li Kingdom. Hearing Ming Jinzi's words, she sneered. The four sects are all out, where can he go? And this time, I brought two things that can guarantee that he won't be able to escape even if he doesn't want to. Saying so, she flicked her sleeve and an item appeared in her palm. This item was round and shiny. It looked like a transparent glass, but golden light flowed inside. Upon closer inspection, it was actually countless small swords. Ming Jinzi didn't recognize this item, and only frowned. What is this? Jing Guangzi laughed. Oh. Senior Ming Jinzi's dojo is in such a remote place like the Yu Kingdom, and you don't often go to the Cloud Mountain, so it's normal that you don't recognize this item. This is called the Glass Sword Heart. It was made by a sage of our Kenzo in the past, and has been passed down from generation to generation. Now that it's in my hands, does Senior know the fog-locked toad palace of the Langia heavenly abode in Daotong? This glass sword heart specializes in breaking through the illusion realm, and can restrain that magic treasure. With this item, where can that demon escape to? Ming Jinzi frowned. Then what about the other item? Jing Guangzi laughed. The other item is something I brought from the Cloud Mountain. After saying this, he stared at Ming Jinzi for a while. Senior brother said that previously when Cheng Kongzi was chasing Li Yunxin, he tossed out the corpses of the two demon generals under him before he was counter-killed. Then, this Li Yunxin is actually a demon that values comradeship? Ming Jinzi was slightly startled and immediately said, Junior Marshal sister, don't think too much. that Li Yunxin killed Chen Kongzi in rage, not because of comradeship, but because... He paused. But because of the powerlessness of being unable to control the life and death of the demons under him, which made him furious. These two things sound similar, but they're not the same thing. Jing Guangzi listened to his words and sized him up strangely. Then she laughed. Where did Senior Marshal Brother hear this strange reasoning? What is unable to control? Does Senior Marshal Brother know what that Li Yunxin is thinking in his heart? Ming Jinzi said seriously, Junior Marshal's sister, don't take it seriously. Jing Guangzi shook her head and raised her hand to interrupt him. I know Senior Marshal Brother. You're a little afraid of that Li Yunxin. But Senior Marshal Brother, don't forget. We sword cultivators first cultivate sword's courage. If Senior Marshal Brother's sword's courage is gone, how far are you from falling into the demonic path? As for what that Chen Kongzi did before, alas, he found the right method by accident, but used it at the wrong time. Jing Guangzi put her hands behind her back and looked down. She saw that Li Yunxin was standing in a sea of fire and saying something to the other three mortals. She smiled faintly. The demon general under Li Yunxin, regardless of whether he cares or not, will always be useful. Why did this Li Yunxin make the seniors of the Heavenly Passage and school return in defeat? Because he's both a demon and a cultivator. This is his advantage, but it's also his disadvantage. The nun narrowed her eyes slightly. He has to have a Tao heart. He'll always have the tribulation of desire. Even if he didn't have it in the past, we'll slowly make him have it now. Kill his family, kill his true love, destroy the things he cares about one by one, and see what happens to his inner demon. When that time comes, he'll definitely destroy himself. Finished speaking, Jing Guangzi raised her hand and threw the glazed sword heart into the sky. Strangely enough, this thing was a ball in her hand. But once it left her hand, it immediately turned into a faint cloud and mist, dispersing into the fire clouds in the blink of an eye. It takes a quarter of an hour to set up the glazed sword heart, Jing Guangzi said. If we keep him here for a quarter of an hour, he'll definitely die. Ming Jinzi was also the sect master of a sect. But at this moment, he'd lost so many disciples, and this Jing Guangzi mocked him time and time again. So he was already indignant. Thus he sneered. A quarter of an hour. That Li Yunxin is extremely cunning. If Junior Marshal's sister doesn't get everyone to act together and delay him, I'm afraid he won't even last 2 breaths of time. But just as he finished speaking, he saw that Li Yunxin seemed to have explained something to the 3 mortals. He raised his head and said loudly, This prince is not in the mood to play with you trash. When I have time in the future, I'll pay you a visit one by one. As for now, I'll take my leave for now. Finished speaking, he shot into the sea of fire like a bolt of lightning. But just as he fled 20 feet away, he suddenly heard a stern shout come from the cloud again. Li Yunxin, look who this is. A figure fell from the cloud at the same time. It stopped after falling a bit more than 10 feet. As it turned out, it had been tied up by a rope made of some unknown material and thrown down. Li Yunxin turned his head to take a look, then stopped. He frowned in the raging fire. Ming Jinzi also saw this person. It seemed to be a beautiful and charming woman dressed in black. Her waist was tightened by the rope, which made her even more enchanting. Just looking at her face and expression, she didn't look like a mortal nor a cultivator. He frowned. Who is this person? Did he really stop? Kuan Wuxia of Langia Cave Paradise caught 2 little monsters at the Dongting. They are the monster generals under the devil Li Yunxin. One is called the Black Dragon Messenger, and the other is called the Red Dragon Messenger. This one is the Black Dragon Messenger. The golden photon took a slight step, and the fiery cloud beneath his feet parted. He landed beside the Black Dragon envoy. The demon general transformed from the black cat that Li Yunxin was riding on, and Fairy Chong. She raised her voice and said, Li Yunxin, this monster general under your command is loyal to you. He suffered the astral wind in the grotto of Yunshan for more than a month, but he didn't even say a word about you. Now, since he doesn't want to say anything, it's useless. It's just nice to kill him in front of the battle today, as a sacrifice to the flag. What do you think? Li Yunxin was silent for a while. Then, a crimson mist suddenly appeared under his feet, and lifted him up into the sky like a wave. A thin and long fiery mist, like a sword rising from the ground, sent him not far away from Sergeant Eugene Kwong. He stared at the sheriff carefully for a while. The black cat's eyes were originally closed weakly. Now they were slightly open, whispering, "My king." Li Yunxin sighed slightly. "Silly girl. Why can't you say it? Why suffer like this?" The sheriff very slowly blinked her eyes. "Cloud Mountain. Floating around. The scenery is not bad. The wind is strong and cool. It's not suffering. But my king, I haven't eaten meat for a long time. I miss it very much." Li Yunxin looked at her, gritted his teeth and laughed. "Stinky Taoist priests are sour and stingy. How can they be willing to give you meat to eat? When I kill them one by one in the future, you can eat the tender skin and meat of these Taoist priests and swordsmen." Golden Light smiled. "Since it's heartache, it's better to hand over the jade inscriptions. Or go back to Yunshan with me. Who knows if there's a chance of survival? Why do you have to stubbornly resist?" She took 2 steps on the cloud again. "But everyone says that you, Li Yunxin, are cruel and heartless. But it doesn't seem like that today. Did you get into an accident and become affectionate? If this is the case, if I kill your loved ones one by one in the future, won't you die of pain?" But the black cat demon exhaled a few breaths and whispered, "My king, naturally don't believe the nonsense of the stinky Taoist priests. If my king hands over anything, not only I will still die, but my king will also die. I can't be protected." Li Yunxin was silent for a while. Then he looked at the black cat. "Are you afraid of death?" The cat demon laughed. "I'm not afraid. Good girl." Li Yunxin suddenly flew back a few steps, looked at the Taoist priests in the sky one by one, and then raised his hand. "Lingshu Sword Sect, Chuliao Sword Sect, Lingguang Sword Sect, Wuyan Sword Sect. You dare to come and kill me, and even dare to tell me your name. You really have guts." When he said these words, his voice was calm. It was not as indifferent as Ming Jinzi imagined, nor as angry as Golden Light imagined. It was just cold and gloomy. He looked at Golden Light again. "I have always been the one to threaten others with this kind of thing. You're also the first person to threaten me with something like this. Before that, Kuan Wuxia of Langya Cave knew not to force me to death, and imprisoned my 2 disciples in Yunshan, so that I would not take action for fear of harming the innocent. But now you really have guts." Then he shook his head and laughed. "There are some things I don't like to say. After all, we are all adults. Saying it is very shameful. But since you have the guts to come face to face with me today, then I will also let you know. You dare to touch a hair of hers. Within 7 days, I will destroy your whole sect. If you dare to hurt a finger of hers, within a month, your 4 sects will all die." The swordsmen in the sky were all silent for a while. Then they suddenly roared with laughter, so loud that the fire clouds were about to disperse. Golden Light did not laugh. She calmly stared at Li Yunxin, as if she had discovered something interesting. Then she raised her hand, and calmly and indifferently waved it. A strand of hair fell from the cat demon's ear, and in the blink of an eye, it was swallowed by the fire clouds under her feet. "How can you say such a thing?" She looked at Li Yunxin in confusion. "Where did you get such arrogant courage?" She reached out again and pinched one of the cat demon's wrists. She stared straight at Li Yunxin. She exerted force with her 2 fingers, and there was a crisp cracking sound. "Don't you know that you are about to die?" It was at this time that a crisp sound came from the sky. An invisible barrier enveloped the whole of Changji town. The glazed sword heart array had been completed. Chapter 347. A quarter of an hour. Less than 30 feet away from Li Yunxin, Jin Guangzi turned his head to look at Ming Jinzi above, as if there was no one else around, and smiled. "Your biggest mistake in the past was to mistakenly believe that this Li Yunxin was cold and heartless. But a truly cold and heartless person would never emphasize this point. For example, you and me. So to kill him you have to use emotion. These men don't understand you, but I can see through you." The Taoist nun turned her head and looked at Li Yunxin. Then, she pointed a finger at the cat demon and said softly, "Cut." A small golden sword suddenly formed above the cat demon's head, and then fiercely pierced down. It was too late, but it happened very quickly. At the moment when the golden sword was about to pierce through the cat demon, Li Yunqin immediately leaned forward and shook it away with a bang. Then he cut the ropes and pulled her over. Jing Guangzi laughed loudly. The red cloud under her feet suddenly rose up and returned to the formation. I thought you were really a heartless and peerless demon, but now you've become a soft-hearted stupid demon. Could it be that you couldn't tell that I was using that strike to test you? Can't you see that I delayed you for a quarter of an hour, just to complete this formation? Li Yunqin picked up the weak cat demon, raised her head and smiled. She threw her to Yu Meng's side and said, How do you know that I have been waiting here for you for a quarter of an hour, not to complete my magic formation? After saying this, he shook his right hand. The cultivators on the cloud couldn't see what was in his hand, but they could hear a burst of crashing sound. When they looked down again, the area below Li Yunqin, the area covered by the glazed sword heart, was completely extinguished. Then they heard the demon shout, Go! His shout was meant for Yu Meng to hear. None of the cultivators on the clouds had opened their heaven eyes. Because he had opened the third eye, he often encountered ghosts and monsters, which disturbed his state of mind. The wandering ghosts in the world were as harmless as dust to cultivators. If he was not a rogue Taoist in Jianghu, who didn't have a reason to cultivate such magical power. Note 1, if he really needed it, he could just use a talisman. Therefore they didn't notice it. But Yu Meng clearly saw that in Li Yunqin's hand, there was a green iron chain. Hundreds of thousands of ghosts were bound to this misty green iron chain. Before this, Li Yunqin had used these ghosts to clear a path in the fire to Yu Meng, Wuxia and Lily. Just now, when he rose to the top of the cloud, that long iron chain hung down from the sky. It was a terrifying scene. The wailing ghosts were like fruits on a vine that hung from the clouds to the ground. One by one, Li Yunqin threw them into the ground. They turned into rays of green light and disappeared. Yu Meng realized that Li Yunqin was secretly casting a spell, but he didn't know what his purpose was. At this moment, when he saw the fire in front of him suddenly disappear, and heard Li Yunqin's thunderous shout from the cloud, he was stunned for a moment. Did he cast a spell and used up thousands of ghosts just to give them a way out? He looked up in surprise, but he could only see the fiery red sky, the vague figures of people, and the faint golden light. He couldn't see Li Yunqin's real appearance. However, Wuxia and Lily by his side did not delay. Li Yunqin tossed the cat demoness down. The weak demoness revealed her original form and steadily landed at Lily's feet. It was a big black cat with a long and gorgeous beard. Its entire body was black and shiny like brocade. Lily was stunned for a moment. Then she hugged the heavy and soft big cat. Wuxia pulled Yu Meng. Young master, let's go. Yu Meng was pulled by her and staggered for a few steps. Suddenly he looked up and shouted, Li Yunqin. But he, Wuxia, and Lily were just ordinary people at the moment. The immortals and demons who were about to fight were high up in the clouds. How could they hear his shout? In the next moment, a series of thunderclaps suddenly erupted in the sky. Li Yunqin had revealed her dragon form, which was 1,000 feet long. She leaped through the clouds in thunder, and pounced on the swordsman above the clouds. When Qi Wen's real body appeared, the air blast caused the low-pressure fire cloud to shake slightly. With just a few movements of his body, the ferocious dragon head had already reached the top of the cloud. The space covered by the magic treasure glazed sword heart was huge. The whole Changji town and a long stretch of Tulan River was covered. Ordinary people would need at least a quarter of an hour to run from one end to the other. However, such a space was like a small fish tank to Li Yunqin, who had revealed her true form. He circled around the inner wall and raised his head again. It spat out a burst of vigorous and shiny purple gas, and with a boom, it exploded in the sky. Countless electric snakes spun and spread out. The upper half of the glazed sword heart's magic shield was almost plowed by the lightning. The cultivators at the top of the cloud with lower cultivation levels fell from the sky like dumplings. They didn't even have the chance to struggle, because the dragon's 9 heavens thunderfire had burned them in an instant. After his fierce attack, The fire cloud lit up with all kinds of mysterious lights. The cultivators had taken out their protective magic treasures and released a dense number of flying swords, all of which struck the gigantic dragon's body with a series of clanging sounds. However, the golden light was standing next to Mingjinzi. She quietly squinted and watched Li Yunqin deal with the Taoists, but didn't make a move. Look. She even smiled. She was indifferent to the deaths and injuries of the low-level disciples. Look at what he's doing. In the time she said this, Li Yunqin had already gained the upper hand. He suddenly dispersed the cloud in the west and rushed into the crowd. The swordsman's flying swords could cut through metal and stone like tofu. But how could the scales of the dragons be compared to the metal and stone of the mortal world? Because of the bombardment of flying swords and spells, Li Yunqin's body burst out dense sparks, like dense raindrops splashing on the ground like mist. But the flying swords of the cultivators were like needles to his dragon body. Occasionally, some of them could penetrate, but with a sweep of his body, they were all swept away. This tyrannical demon rushed into the crowd, opened his mouth, and sucked in 6 or 7 people along with the thunder cloud. With a bite and a close, he chewed them to pieces. Then with a loud bang, he turned into a large cloud of blood mist and spat out, blasting a series of disciples riding on flying swords into pieces. Carrying the wind and thunder with it, it swam to a place where the crowd was densely packed. The scales suddenly opened and closed, and with a series of loud kacha, there was another explosion of thunder that filled the sky, and another 8 or 9 unlucky people who couldn't dodge in time were killed. The dragons with strong bodies were like fierce tigers rushing into a flock of sheep. In just 2 breaths, they killed to their heart's content. Then, they turned around and rushed down, quickly breaking away from the battle and pouncing on the other side. But there were still high-level swordsmen with higher cultivation in the crowd. Just a few hundred feet after he descended from the cloud, a dark and heavy flying sword hid among the broken limbs and chunks of flesh that rained down like raindrops, hitting the dragon's neck right in the middle. Almost no sound was heard, and there were no sparks or electric sparks like when ordinary flying swords hit his body. The black sword silently sank into his body, and in the blink of an eye, it pierced through his body. When it went in, no wound could be seen, but when it came out, a terrible big hole immediately exploded on the dragon's neck, and the dragon bones with golden light flowing inside could almost be seen. Li Yunqin's body suddenly trembled, as if he was in extreme pain, and with a loud bang, he flew up into the sky. But at this time, the protective barrier of the glazed sword heart played its role. No matter how high he flew, he was stuck at a certain height. From the wound on his neck, the golden dragon blood really sprinkled down like a huge waterfall. Once it was poured on the fire cloud, it immediately burned with a loud bang. If it was not poured on the cloud, but on the person, that person let out a short scream, and was immediately corroded by the golden blood into white bones. After being seriously injured, Li Yunqin let out a heaven-shaking roar. Immediately, 2 golden flowing lights appeared beside him. It was a protective formation formed by the 2 golden deities. He fiercely dived down again. Staring at the cloud that shot out the black sword, he shouted, "Fight!" But this voice, it sounded like it was not made by him alone. But at the same time, there was another rough, bold, and unrestrained male voice. After this shout, in the void in front of Li Yunqin, an incomparably huge and powerful man suddenly appeared. This man's body was cold, and he had a dignified appearance. His pair of eyes emitted cold stars, and his 2 curved eyebrows were like brushed paint. Looking at him, he actually had an awe-inspiring aura that even 10,000 men could not defeat. Right now, this huge human figure was in the sky, and one of his fingers was as big as a human. It really looked like a god from the heavens had descended to the mortal world, indomitable and indomitable. Once this huge human figure was formed, the cold light in his eyes shot straight at the cloud, and then he shouted angrily, "Where's the wine?" With this extremely deep and powerful roar, he raised his fist that was as big as a small mountain and fiercely smashed it. The swordsman immediately knew that Li Yunqin had used a horrifying spiritual treasure. However, as soon as this man appeared, the hiding place of the person who had injured Li Yunxin also lit up with dazzling spiritual light at the same time. A solemn and majestic voice chanted a spell. Where are all the gods on duty, the guardians of the myriad realms? Under the order of Patriarch Wanjun, come quickly and help me. Every time the cultivator chanted a god's name, a huge golden light incarnation appeared. Although these angry golden light deities were only half the height of the stalwart man, their bodies were surrounded by treasure light, and the sabers and spears in their hands were awe-inspiring. They gathered into a formation with 8 sides and 6 arrows, and they swarmed forward to block the man's fist. However, boom! These gods were shattered by this man's fist, and they turned into flowing lights that scattered in all directions, as if they were made of paper. The person hiding behind the cloud immediately chanted another spell. At the same time, he splashed out talismans that filled the sky and released 2 sword arrays to protect himself. Then he let out a cold laugh and said, "Insignificant tricks. Look at me." However, there was another loud rumbling sound. A large stretch of clouds was smashed into pieces by the unstoppable iron fist. Those talismans and sword formations were all turned into flying ash. Before the voice could finish speaking, his physical body was also smashed. At this moment, the huge and majestic man looked up at the sky and laughed, shouting, "Where is the tiger?" Then his figure faded and disappeared into the void. After a full 3 breaths, the high sky was quiet for a full 3 breaths. Then the disciples shouted, "Immortal Chan has fallen! Immortal Chan has fallen!" At this moment, only a dozen breaths had passed since the golden light said the last sentence. During this time, Ming Jinzi only had time to frown slightly, pause for a moment, and then look at the place where Li Yunxin was fighting. Then, he heard the swordsman on the cloud shout loudly, "Immortal Chan has fallen!" He was dumbfounded. In just a dozen breaths, on the scorched ground that was still emitting green smoke, the 3 people who were shouted at by Li Yunxin to go only ran a few dozen steps. That immortal Chan of Chu Liao sword sect, a sword cultivator who was good at fighting, was killed by Li Yunxin. This scene immediately evoked a terrible memory in his heart. That day, Li Yunxin stood in the blazing flames, bathed in Cheng Kongzi's flesh and blood, and glanced at him eerily. Ming Jinzi couldn't breathe and choked. "Junior sister, why are you standing there? He has already killed 1 person. Do you want him to kill them one by one?" Jin Guangzi's expression remained unchanged. High in the clouds, she looked indifferently at the heavily injured Li Yunxin, who was protected by the 2 golden light gods, and rushed into the battle. She said, "Keep watching." Ming Jinzi abruptly waved his big sleeve. "What are you looking at? You formed the glazed sword heart array, but didn't release it. Do you know that you have trapped Li Yunxin and your fellow cultivators?" That demon rushed into the crowd like a tiger rushing into a flock of sheep. "Do you plan to stay and fight him alone?" Behind Jin Guangzi and Ming Jinzi were the disciples of the Wujin sword sect. Now their sect master didn't move, and they didn't move either. Even though the cultivators of the other 2 sects were fighting Li Yunxin, they acted as if they were their master. Their expressions were indifferent, as if the situation had nothing to do with them. This made Ming Jinzi look like a timid and weak secular person, as if he was facing a formidable enemy. Jin Guangdian sighed. "Junior brother, you can continue reading." Like a parent who was finally annoyed by her child, she raised her hand and pointed at Li Yunxin from afar. "Li Yunxin has revealed the incarnation of Shinryu. According to what you said, rushing into the crowd is indeed like a tiger rushing into a flock of sheep. But look at why he no longer relies on his advantage of coming like lightning and leaving like the wind. He first rushes for a while, then turns around and leaves. What if he rushes over when the other side has no time to support him? His physical body is tyrannical, and his speed is beyond our reach. It is best to use this kind of attack and escape method. But look at him from just now until now. He hasn't been fighting like this." "He is." Ming Jinzi was restless at first. But listening to Jin Guangzi speak in such a calm and steady tone, her heart slowly calmed down. At this time, looking in the direction that Jin Guangzi pointed, She also saw the door. Li Yunqin was indeed strange. Note 1. This was explained in a chapter a long time ago, but I can't find which chapter it is. The gist of it is that people often die in the world. Although ghosts are not common, cultivators cultivate spiritual power. The ghosts that have not been collected in time always like to go to places with more spiritual power. Therefore, there may be more ghosts around cultivators. If you open the magical power of the third eye, you can see ghosts 24 hours a day. It is quite scary to suddenly see a ghost face when you open your eyes after meditating. Most ghosts are not worth paying attention to, so cultivators will not deliberately open the magical power of the third eye. As the saying goes, out of sight, out of mind. That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.